A year ago, I thought my marriage to Yumi was built on trust, and my partnership with Kaito on honesty. That evening, I stood in the dark hallway of my own home and listened, as both of those words died behind the door of my study. Their voices came through the half-open door. Yumi spoke quietly, almost calmly, as if she were discussing not my doctor, not my company, and not my life, but some ordinary furniture purchase for the living room. She asked whether the doctor would sign a report about my instability. Kaito answered at once, confidently and far too gently. If the doctor received the second half of the money, my vote on the board of directors could be frozen. I did not go in. I did not shout. I did not slam the door. I simply stood in the hallway and listened as my wife and my best friend discussed the neatest way to remove me from my own company. Kaito said that, in order to protect the corporation, I needed to be temporarily removed from decision-making. Yumi asked what would happen to the patents, and for the first time there was no concern in her voice, only hunger. He explained to her that after the medical report, the board would be able to transfer control of the assets to him. My signature would still be needed, but only as a formality, the kind a sick man could easily be pressured into providing. In that moment, the pain struck harder than anger. For 7 years, I had paid off Yumi's family debts, rescued Kaito after his failure in Osaka, and believed that the people beside me were human beings, not future corporate raiders. I took out my phone and started recording. Not because I was some cold genius from a cheap novel, because I understood one simple thing. If I walked in there now as a husband, tomorrow I would lose as a director. Yumi said I was too tired and increasingly looked lost. Kaito chuckled and replied that this was exactly what would help them if my exhaustion was presented properly to the board and the doctor. I looked at the velvet box in my hand. Inside lay an antique hairpin, an anniversary gift. An hour earlier, I had thought she would be happy. Now the object seemed absurd. The study door began to open, and I silently stepped back into the shadow of the hallway. The soft carpet swallowed my footsteps, and the recording had already captured the most important thing. They had not merely betrayed me. They were preparing a takeover. Yumi came out first. She adjusted her hair with that light little gesture that had once felt domestic and familiar to me. Now, I saw in it only the habit of a woman certain no one had caught her. Kaito came out after her and paused by the door for a second, checking the hallway. He was more careful than Yumi. Not smarter, but more careful. That was exactly why I could not scare him too early. I was standing by the living room window, pretending to be exhausted, when Yumi approached me with the soft face of a caring wife. She asked why I was not sleeping and touched my shoulder so gently, as if she had not been selling me 10 minutes earlier. I answered that my head hurt again, and my eyes burned from the monitor. Yumi immediately frowned, playing concern almost flawlessly, and said I truly ought to take a break from work. I nodded. I did not argue, did not get angry, did not try to prove that I was perfectly fine. For 1 second, relief flashed in her eyes, and that little flash was enough for me. Then I took out the box and handed her the gift. Yumi opened the lid, saw the antique silver hairpin, and gave a quiet gasp. The sound was beautiful, but it came too late for me to believe in it. She let me fasten the hairpin in her hair. I did it slowly, carefully, almost tenderly. In that moment, I understood for the first time how strange love looks when a lie has already settled inside it. Yumi looked at her reflection in the dark window glass and smiled. She thought I was still the same tired husband, ready to sign any document as long as it kept peace inside the house. I said I would think about temporarily stepping back from business. She squeezed my hand a little harder than necessary and thanked me so quickly that it felt as if she feared I might change my mind. When the bedroom door closed behind her, the house became different. The same walls, the same light, the same furniture, yet everything inside already smelled not of family, but of an ambush I would have to endure myself. I returned to the study and played the recording again. Yumi and Kaito's voices came through the phone speaker dry and dirty. There is no music in betrayal, only ordinary words spoken by ordinary people. A few minutes later, I sent the file to Ryu Murata, my old lawyer. Ryu disliked emotions, distrusted the cloud, and believed a good document should smell of paper, not a server. His reply came almost immediately. Do not make any sudden moves. My office tomorrow morning, short, without consolation. That was exactly why I still kept him close. I opened the work terminal and checked the night connections to the corporate system. Kaito truly had not wasted any time. There had been a request from his personal device to the patent archive. He obtained nothing important, only an old test folder I kept for internal checks. But the fact itself was more valuable than any folder. My partner had begun acting before my official removal. I could have cut off his access that very second. I could have sent a security report to the board and caused a scandal. But then Kaito would understand that I was no longer asleep, and the entire game would end too early. Instead, I left him a narrow passage to old files, enough for him to believe in success, not enough to harm the company if he decided to sell his prize ahead of schedule. A new copy notification appeared on the screen. Kaito was taking the fake folder greedily and carelessly. He thought he was dragging gold out of my house, while in reality, he was leaving fingerprints on an empty box. I saved the logs and sent them to Ryu in a separate package, not as digital magic, but as a simple trail: login time, device, request route, and the files Kaito himself had chosen to steal. In the morning, the kitchen shone with white light, as if nothing had happened. Yumi placed breakfast before me and smiled so softly that a stranger would have decided he was looking at the perfect wife. She said she had worried about me all night. I thanked her in a weak voice and rubbed my temples, letting her see exactly what she wanted to see: a tired man who was already finding it difficult to resist. A couple of minutes later, she slid a blue folder toward me. On the cover was something dull about tax risks and temporary management optimization. A good lie always begins with a boring title. Yumi explained that it was a simple formality, just to take part of the burden off me. I opened the first page and immediately saw a power of attorney allowing Kaito to participate in negotiations involving my assets. I picked up the pen. Yumi stopped breathing. It was almost beautiful. A person can spend a lifetime learning to hide emotions, then betray herself with one glance at a signature. The nib touched the paper, but I stopped and squeezed my eyes shut as if from pain. The pen slipped from my fingers onto the table. Quietly, I said the lines were swimming before my eyes, and I needed to postpone this for a couple of days. Yumi's smile trembled, only for a moment. Then she became the caring wife again, put the folder away, and offered me pills, but I had already seen the irritation beneath that tenderness. She did not need my signature someday. She needed it now, while Kaito could still keep the board of directors waiting and sell them the story of my worsening condition. I apologized and said I would sign everything after an examination. Yumi nodded, but her fingers clenched the folder so tightly that the edge of the paper visibly bent. In the car, I finally stopped pretending to be sick. I closed the door, exhaled, and called Ryu. He answered after the second ring, as if he were already sitting over my case with a cup of bitter coffee. I briefly told him about the power of attorney. Ryu listened and said Kaito had already filed a request through the finance committee for temporary access to part of the patent archive. That was bad, not fatal, but bad. While I was playing weak, Kaito had managed to make a move that could give him the right to speak to investors on behalf of the company. Ryu said we could block the request immediately, but if we did, Kaito would understand that I was not as broken as I looked, and then he would start hiding. I looked out the window at the wet street and realized the game was no longer safe. To truly catch them, I would have to give them a small victory. I authorized limited access to an old version of the project. Not the core, not the active patents. An old archive that looked valuable enough for Kaito to taste victory. Ryu was silent for a moment, then said, "This is already a risk, Kenji." I answered honestly, "I know." For the first time in 24 hours, I felt not only pain, but fear. 20 minutes later, a notification arrived. Kaito had received access. Another minute later, through the glass wall of the office, I saw him take out his phone and smile as if he had just won the company. He called Yumi directly from the conference room. I did not hear the whole conversation, but one phrase sounded loudly enough. He signed the access. It has begun. Yes, Kaito, it had begun. Only not your rise, but the first crack in the floor beneath your feet. And
If Kenji had stormed into the office that night, Yumi would have instantly played the victim, and Kaito would have called him unstable. So he did the hardest thing. He stayed silent. Sometimes the first blow is not the strongest one. The strongest blow begins when the enemy leaves his own traces behind.
And now you had stepped into the place where I could not have pushed you. Rain beat against the windshield in even, heavy stripes while I sat in the car near the office and listened to Ryu Murata's voice. The old lawyer spoke calmly, but every word stripped another layer of false shine from Kaito. It turned out my best partner had long stopped being a successful investor. His funds survived on extensions, personal promises, and other people's fear of admitting that an elegant suit does not always mean money. Ryu said Kaito owed private investors more than $10 million. Not banks, not ordinary creditors, but people who rarely send polite reminder letters. Now his haste made sense. Kaito did not simply want to steal my patents for power. He needed my assets as a life raft because the water was already up to his throat. I looked at the wet street and remembered how I had once given him his first office after his failure in Osaka. He had cried in my kitchen and sworn he would never forget my help. He had not forgotten. He had simply decided that because I had helped him once, I was obligated to feed his fears for the rest of his life. Some people confuse gratitude with a right to your wallet, Ryu continued. Kaito had already begun showing the old patent folder to one outside investor. He had not sold it, not transferred it, but hinted enough to create the appearance of a future deal. That was worse than I expected. The fake folder could not destroy the company, but it could frighten the board of directors if Kaito presented it as proof that I had lost control. I asked if we could stop the meeting. Ryu answered dryly, "We can, but then he will understand that you see him. Right now he is still too self-confident, and that is our only discount." I ended the call and placed the phone on the seat beside me. For the first time in days, I had to admit it. My plan was not a perfect trap. I had given Kaito a small door, and he was already trying to open someone else's hall. The banking app lay open on the tablet screen. I did not want to turn revenge into a petty family reprisal, but Yumi needed to feel her first loss not in court, but in the place where she lived every day. I opened the permissions on her supplementary card. Until that moment, Yumi had spent my money as if it were born together with her desires. Restaurants, bags, salons, trips, gifts for friends. I did not block all accounts. That would have been too obvious. I left her a normal limit for household expenses and froze only the bottomless card she was used to using as proof of her superiority to the world. The system sent a short notification about the changed limit. No thunder, no music, just one line on the screen, meant to show Yumi for the first time that someone else's money was not part of her body. I knew where she was at that moment. In an elite boutique in Ginza, with two friends who smiled at her only as long as her card opened champagne, discounts, and other people's envy before them. Yumi loved places like that. They did not sell clothes there. They sold proof that you were above others. She could spend hours choosing a dress if there was someone nearby to look at the price tag. That day, she picked several silk dresses, a bag from the new collection, and a piece of jewelry she would wear one evening and then forget in a drawer. To her, it was not a purchase. It was a ritual of power. The cashier carefully arranged the items on the marble counter and named the total almost in a whisper. Yuma's friends exchanged admiring glances. Though I would not have called it admiration, it was anticipation of a fall. Yumi took out my premium card and handed it over with her usual ease. She did not even look at the terminal. Why look at a door that had always opened for you by itself? The terminal thought longer than usual. Then came a short beep, and a red decline message appeared on the screen. The cashier blinked, as if the expensive store had just violated its own religion. Yumi did not understand at first. She smiled, as if the error might be frightened by her face. "Try it again," she said. Her voice was even, but her fingers had already tightened around the handle of her bag. The second attempt ended with the same beep, the third as well. The cashier blushed and quietly suggested contacting the bank. The store grew far too quiet for a place where expensive fabrics had just been rustling. Yuma's friends no longer smiled up at her. Now they looked straight at her. In their eyes appeared that very pleasure people hide when a rich person suddenly becomes ordinary. Yumi snatched back the card. She said something about a technical malfunction, the bank, and incompetent staff. But her voice already carried not a mistress's anger, but a kept woman's panic. She left the boutique without any bags.
Kenji did not strike the card. He struck the image Yumi had lived inside for years. For her, money was not just comfort, it was proof of status. And when the card was declined in front of her friends, she felt for the first time that luxury without its owner becomes nothing more than an ordinary piece of plastic.
The cashier remained at the counter, her friends exchanged glances, and my phone in the car received a notification of a rejected purchase large enough for an employee to live on for a year. I did not smile. This was not happiness, just the first small sound of the reality Yumi had chosen herself. She wanted to live without me, yet for some reason expected to keep my wallet. By evening, she came home earlier than usual. I heard the door close harder than necessary, and her heels strike down the hallway in quick, nervous beats. I entered the living room 10 minutes later, again wearing a tired face and walking slowly. Yumi was sitting on the sofa, but she could not stay seated. She jumped up the moment she saw me. "What happened to my card?" she asked. Not we have a problem, not the bank made a mistake. Specifically my. There was more truth in that one word than in all her marriage vows. I took off my jacket and hung it over the back of a chair. Which card? Yumi took a step closer. Do not pretend. Today I was made to look like an idiot in front of the entire boutique. I looked at her with the concern she wanted to see. Yumi, the bank sent a notification this morning about an account review, probably because of last night's activity in the system. She froze, very quickly, but I saw it. The word activity landed exactly where it needed to. Kaito had tried to get into my archive, and now the banking review looked to her like a consequence of his mistake. What activity? She asked too quietly. I shrugged. Security decided to be cautious. They say someone tried to gain access to corporate data. Her face grew paler. That morning she had been angry at me for delaying the signature. Now she was afraid their own greed had triggered the alarm too early. I took out my phone and showed her the official bank letter. Ryu had helped make it so boring that it looked almost sacred. Long formulations, temporary review, personal confirmation by the owner. Yumi read the letter twice. She very much wanted to accuse me, but I looked like just as much of a victim as she did. A good lie does not shout, it simply closes all convenient exits. So what am I supposed to do now? She asked. The question sounded sharp, but beneath it was real humiliation. A person used to commanding someone else's money had suddenly found herself reduced to asking. I took out my wallet and placed a stack of cash on the table, a small one. Enough for ordinary expenses, but ridiculous for a woman who had tried that morning to buy half a boutique. Yumi looked at the money as if I had placed a dirty rag in front of her. Pure, instant hatred appeared in her eyes. For 1 second, the wife's mask vanished completely. I said softly, until the review is finished, it's better not to make large purchases. You'll have to endure it for a while. She picked up the bills with her fingertips, as if afraid of staining herself with poverty. Thank you, she said. The word was sharp, almost poisonous. Then she turned and went into the bathroom, locking the door louder than necessary. I remained in the living room and looked at the blue folder she had tried to slide to me over breakfast. Signature, card, bank, Kaito. Their plan had already begun pressing on them from two sides. Later that night, Yumi left the house alone. I did not stop her. She thought she was going to speak with an ally, but in reality she was going to check whether Kaito had become her new problem. She stopped in a dark parking lot near a closed country club. Only the phone screen glowed inside the car. From her voice, it was obvious she was trying to whisper, but panic does not know how to be quiet. You said everything was under control, she told Kaito. After your access attempt, the bank froze the card. Today I was humiliated in front of people. Kaito did not comfort her. That was important. The lover disappeared the moment the money stopped flowing. On the line there was no seducer, only a man with a foot on his throat. I do not have time for your dresses right now, he said. The people I owe came to the office. If the patents are not in my hands by the end of the week, they will take more than just my watch. Yumi was silent for a long time. Then she asked what exactly he wanted from her. Kaito answered, Kenji's signature, or access to his safe. I do not care how you do it. His voice grew harder. He was no longer asking, he was ordering. That was the first real crack between them. Yumi wanted rich freedom, while Kaito wanted to survive. She said I had begun suspecting a glitch in the system. Kaito cursed and ordered her not to say such words over the phone. Fear had finally made him smarter, but far too late. I listened to the recording later in the study, through a simple duplicate access to her phone that Ryu had insisted on setting up as part of family security. No magic, only permissions Yumi herself had once signed. Kaito reminded her that the forged medical documents already carried her confirmations. If she backed out, he would not fall alone. He said it calmly, without romance, and without the softness from before. Yumi whispered, You promised me freedom. He answered, Freedom costs money, and right now he has the money. That was their entire love, compressed into one filthy accounting line. She sat behind the wheel, clutching the phone so tightly that her knuckles turned white. For the first time, her glittering life showed its inner framework: fear, dependency, and someone else's debt. Kaito demanded that she bring me the documents again in the morning. If I refused, she would have to find another way to the safe where my personal board voting access token was kept. Now they had reached the criminal line. Until then, it had been intrigue, pressure, vile conversations, and attempts at manipulation. The safe meant theft, not family drama, but a crime with real prison time. Yumi asked what would happen if I woke up. Kaito answered, Then make sure he does not wake up. Then he quickly added that he meant pills and sleep, but the first word had already done its work. I stopped the recording on that phrase. The room became quiet, very quiet. Until that moment, somewhere inside me, there had still lived a betrayed husband. After that phrase, only a man obligated to finish the matter remained. I sent the file to Ryu. A minute later, he replied, "Now this is not only divorce and a corporate dispute, now it is preparation for theft and possible coercion." I reread the message and looked at the safe by the wall. Inside, it truly lay the access token, real, functional, important enough for Yumi to believe she held my vote in her hand. But by morning, there would be a different token in the safe, outwardly exactly the same. To Yumi and Kaito, it would look like victory. To us, it would become a marker that would show the court every touch they made. I felt no triumph, only exhaustion and a strange emptiness. When your wife is ready to drug you for a safe, revenge stops being a beautiful story. It becomes sanitary work. The last recording of the night conversation appeared on the screen. Kaito hung up without saying goodbye. Yumi remained in the car, slammed her palm against the steering wheel, and cried not from remorse but from fear of losing someone else's luxury. I turned off the monitor and sat for a long time in the darkness of the study. Their alliance had already cracked. Money, fear, and a real threat had done what no speech of mine ever could. Tomorrow Yumi would smile at me over breakfast again. Kaito would call himself my friend again, and I would again play the man too tired to understand how close the traitors had come to his safe. Only now, the safe would be waiting for them, and for the first time all this time, I was not afraid that they would lose. I was afraid of how far they were willing to go to win. Ryu Murata's office had always seemed like a place where modern technology came to die. It smelled of old leather, tobacco, and paper. People signed with more fear than electronic forms. There was not a single open laptop on his desk, only a lamp, heavy folders, an old model recorder, and a steel safe by the wall. Ryu trusted paper more than any cloud. He listened to the recording of Yumi and Kaito without a single comment. When Kaito said that, after my signature, Yumi would receive half the company, Ryu simply stopped the audio and removed his glasses. "Enough for a divorce," he said. His voice was dry, almost bored. That was how he spoke when a case stopped being emotional and became very expensive. I sat across from him and stared at the silent recorder. "I do not only need a divorce." Ryu raised his eyes. "Then be more precise. Do you want to punish your wife or save the corporation?" I wanted to answer quickly. I could not, because the truth was uglier than a beautiful phrase. "Both," I finally said. Ryu nodded, as if that was exactly what he had been waiting for. He took a thick cardboard folder from the bottom drawer. On the worn cover was the name of the Sato family's construction company. Yumi's surname looked far richer there than the numbers inside. Yumi's parents had always carried themselves as if their old business were a family fortress. At dinners, her father called me a talented technician who had luckily caught the right wave. I smiled and transferred money to them through the reserve fund. Not for him, for Yumi. Back then, it seemed to me that my wife's peace was worth more than my pride. Ryu opened the folder and laid out contracts, bank letters, and overdue demands before me. The Sato family fortress turned out not to be stone but cardboard, and long since soaked through. "They were kept alive by your injections," Ryu said. "For the last 2 years, you have effectively paid their loans, salaries, and the rent on the main office through intermediaries, so as not to offend your father-in-law." I looked at the tables. The numbers were ugly. Not catastrophic for me, but lethal for them. Without my support, Sato Company would not survive even a month. Ryu tapped the top sheet with his finger. "The bank is already ready to sell their debt at a discount. One of my funds can buy the package before this evening." I understood what he was proposing. Not revenge with shouting, not a public scandal, just a quiet change of creditor, after which Yumi's family would see for the first time who had truly been holding up their floor. "You want to make me their creditor," I said. Ryu adjusted his glasses. "I want to make them dependent on the man they were planning to write off as sick." It was legal, harsh, but legal, and still, I did not sign immediately. Before my eyes rose the memory of Yumi's father once saying that my surname did not sound old enough for their family. Ryu noticed my pause. "Kenji, you are not taking their house for pleasure. You are removing the fallback exit of a woman who is ready to have you declared incompetent." He was right. If Yumi realized the plan with Kaito was cracking, she would run to her parents. And if money, a surname, and a safe sofa were waiting for her there, she would become careful again. I picked up the pen. It was heavy, old, scratched along the barrel. Signing such papers with a modern electronic signature would have felt almost insulting. The first assignment contract lay before me. I signed it calmly. On the second, my hand paused for a second but did not tremble. By the third, I no longer felt anger, only unpleasant clarity. Ryu gathered the papers into a separate folder and placed it in the safe. The Satos will receive notice tomorrow morning, not from you, from the fund. Let them fear the system first and learn the name afterward. I rose, but Ryu stopped me with another folder. That is not all. Kaito used his access to the old archive faster than we expected. At that, I sat down again. Kaito had not simply taken the old folder. He had already shown it to two outside investors as evidence that he would soon gain control over the patent division. Ryu placed before me a copy of a letter from one cautious shareholder. The shareholder was asking whether I was truly temporarily handing strategic negotiations to Kaito because of health problems. I read the letter twice. This was the first serious loss, not fatal, but real. While I was pretending to be weak, Kaito had begun selling the board his version of the future. He almost made it, Ryu said. If 3 more shareholders believe that you are not in control of the situation, they will support temporary management without your direct signature. I felt cold, not from fear of Kaito, but from my own miscalculation. I had given him a small victory as bait, and he had already turned it into grounds for a meeting. Ryu did not comfort me. Good lawyers do not pat you on the head when you yourself have opened a door for the enemy. He simply asked whether I wanted to cut off the access right now. I shook my head. No, if we close it today, Kaito will understand that I have my hand on the system, Ryu smirked. And if we do not close it, he may reach the board. That was what real risk looked like. Not a beautiful monologue about control, just 2 bad options on the table, and the need to choose the one that would hurt the enemy more than me. I asked Ryu to prepare an independent audit of Kaito's fund. Not a loud attack, not a press release, but a calm packet of questions that could be asked in front of shareholders. So while he sells everyone the story of your weakness, we will show them that his own strength is built on debt, Ryu said. I nodded, but not too early. I returned to the office closer to noon. In the glass corridor, employees spoke more quietly than usual. The rumor about my health had already moved through the floors faster than any official letter. Kaito was standing by the conference room with the chief financial officer and 2 committee members. He spoke confidently, almost warmly, like a man taking on a heavy burden for a friend. When I approached, the conversation broke off. Kaito immediately stepped toward me. Kenji, you should not have come in. After yesterday's episode, it would have been better to stay home. He said it loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Well played. Care on the surface, a blow beneath it. I leaned a hand against the wall and allowed the pause to become awkward. I wanted to check a few documents, I said. I made my voice weaker than necessary. The CFO looked away. Kaito saw it and almost smiled. The documents can wait, he said. The board matters more. We all want the company not to depend on your condition on any particular day. I looked at him. Are you already speaking for everyone? For 1 second, he could not find an answer. Too short a sentence, too many witnesses, too hard to look kind. Then he gently placed his hand on my shoulder. I speak for people who are worried. I removed his hand slowly without roughness, then let them worry officially. The hallway became quiet. Kaito had not expected resistance, even weak resistance. He needed my obedience, not questions that made witnesses think. I went into my office and closed the door. Through the glass, I saw Kaito typing a message. Most likely to Yumi, too fast, too angry for a caring partner. 10 minutes later, Yumi herself called me. Her voice was tender, but inside that tenderness, her teeth were grinding. She asked why I had gone to the office if I felt unwell. I sat at the desk and rubbed the bridge of my nose. I wanted to feel useful. She fell silent for a second. Then she said I was useful to her, alive and calm, not stubborn. Once such a phrase might have touched me. Now I heard only fear that a stubborn husband would delay the signature, the safe, and everything Kaito had already promised her. I answered that I would be home soon. Yumi exhaled with relief. I could almost see her putting the mask of the perfect wife back onto her face in front of the mirror. But she did not go home that day. First, Yumi went to her parents. After the humiliation at the boutique and my strange calm, she needed the fortress she had believed in all her life. The Sato family mansion stood behind a high fence in an old expensive district. Yumi had always entered it like a princess who only needed to open the door for the world to become right again. This time the door was opened not by a butler, but by her father's secretary, with the face of a person who had already cried that morning. Yumi walked in quickly, without asking permission. In her father's office sat Ryu Murata, back straight, folder on his knees, glasses on the bridge of his nose. Beside him stood Yuma's father, pale, as if he had aged 10 years in one night. Yuma's mother sat on the sofa, pressing a handkerchief to her lips. On the desk lay notices of debt assignment, urgent demands, and copies of contracts with red markings. Yumi froze in the doorway. She had come for support and arrived at an autopsy of the family facade. Everything that was supposed to protect her already lay on the table in the form of debt. Her father broke the silence first. "What have you done?" Yumi turned sharply toward him. "Me? What does this have to do with me?" Her voice was offended but uncertain. Ryu calmly lifted the top sheet. "Sato Company has received a new creditor. All overdue obligations now belong to the fund I represent." Yumi looked at him as if she did not immediately understand the language. Then she saw my surname in the appendix to the documents. Her face changed. "Is this Kenji?" she asked. Ryu did not answer directly. "Let us say the person who covered your debts for many years no longer considers it a family duty." Yuma's father struck the desk with his palm. The blow came out weak, more theatrical than dangerous. "He has no right to do this to our family." Ryu looked at him without anger. "Mr. Sato, your family lived for 5 years at the expense of a man whom yesterday you planned to declare incapable of managing his own assets." Yuma's mother quietly sobbed. Yumi stepped to the desk and grabbed one of the sheets. Her fingers trembled not from pity for her parents, but from the realization that her fallback exit had disappeared. She said it was a mistake, and Kenji would fix everything if they spoke to him calmly. Ryu closed the folder. "Perhaps, but only if he wants to speak." Her father looked at his daughter no longer as his beloved girl, but as the person who had brought foreign papers to their house. "You assured us everything was under control." That phrase struck Yumi harder than the card decline. In the boutique, she had lost face before her friends. Here she lost the role of the daughter backed by a surname. She ran out of the office without saying goodbye. In the hallway, she had to pass family portraits where generations of Satos looked at the world as if they had never borrowed money. Outside, Yumi got into the car and did not start the engine for a long time. Then she called Kaito. He did not answer at once, and the waiting stripped away the last of her calm. "He got to my parents," she said. "Debts, funds, documents." Ryu was sitting in my father's office like the owner. Kaito was silent too long. Then he asked only one thing. "Are you sure it was Kenji?" Yumi almost screamed. "His structure's on the documents. His lawyer, of course it was him." Kaito exhaled through his teeth. There was more fear than anger in that sound. He understood that I was not simply reacting to their plan. I was already striking where they had no cover, but he could not admit that to Yumi. So he said I was bluffing, trying to scare her family, and still too weak to go all the way. Yumi asked what to do. Kaito did not answer immediately. Then he said, "We need to accelerate. If he has started moving debts, he will touch the board soon." He suggested they meet that evening, not at a club and not at a restaurant, but in the underground parking lot of a shopping center. No waiters, no familiar faces, no beautiful words. Yumi stared at her phone for a long time after the call. She was finally beginning to understand. From the status of a rich wife, she was being moved into the status of an accomplice, and there was almost no road back. That same evening, Kaito was not meeting only with her. I had a report from Ryu. 2 of his creditors had come to a closed bar near Roppongi Station and were waiting for him in a private room. Kaito came out 40 minutes later without his tie and with a split lip. No one beat him in public. People like that know how to leave marks where cameras do not look. He got into his car and simply held the steering wheel for several minutes. Then he called Yumi. His voice became soft again, but now that softness resembled a wet rope. "Tonight you will do what needs to be done," he said. Yumi asked what exactly. Kaito answered, "You will enter Kenji's study and check the safe." She whispered that she could not. He laughed quietly. "You already managed to sign the medical papers. You already managed to get into my bed. Do not pretend the safe is worse." Yumi said nothing. In that silence was everything. Fear, anger, resentment, and the very greed for which people often confuse an abyss with a road. Kaito changed his tone. He promised her freedom, half the assets, a house without my rules, and a life where no one would ever hand her cash like a child again. Then he became cold once more. If she refused, he would send me their correspondence, the medical documents, and her signatures. He did not intend to drown alone. I listened to the recording in Ryu's office, where the file had arrived through Yumi's duplicate channel. Ryu removed his glasses and said quietly, "Now he is pressuring her openly." I nodded, "And she will go." Ryu looked at me carefully. "Are you sure?" I remembered her face in the living room when she took the cash from my table. "Yes," I said. "She has already lost the boutique, the card, and her parents' house. Now she will try to regain control over at least something." Ryu opened another folder. Inside lay the plan of my home safe, a copy of the access protocol, and a small black token outwardly indistinguishable from the real one. "The real one stays with me," he said. "There will be a marker in the safe. If she takes it, we will see the path to Kaito. But this is still a risk." I took the token in my hand. It was light. Too light for something people were willing to break a marriage, a company, and their own lives for. "What is the risk?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Ryu said bluntly, "If she realizes the substitution too early, Kaito can strike the board with the old archive. You will not get a second chance." That was what separated this night from beautiful revenge. Everything could collapse. Yumi could panic. Kaito could notice the marker. The board could believe him before I showed proof. I placed the token back in the box. "Then we make sure she does not doubt it." Ryu nodded and handed me a thin envelope with a medical report. The document was real but incomplete. In it, the doctor wrote about exhaustion and the need for rest, not psychosis. But if only the first page was shown, Yumi would see what she wanted to see. That evening at home, I left the sheet on the edge of the desk in my study. Not hidden too deep, not placed too obviously, just careless enough for a thief to decide she had found accidental truth. Yumi returned closer to midnight. She was too quiet. She even took off her heels at the entrance, though she usually walked through the house as if every step had to be heard by the whole floor. I lay in the bedroom with the light off and an open book on my chest. I did not swallow the pill she brought me before bed. It dissolved in a glass by the bathroom. Yumi came in and asked whether I was asleep. I answered indistinctly, like a man falling into sleep. She stood by the bed for almost a minute, checking my breathing. The antique hairpin was still in her hair, my gift, her little crown. And now she was going to my study not as a wife, but as a person who had decided to steal a key. When the door closed quietly, I opened my eyes. There was no music in the house, no thunder, no beautiful signs of the beginning of a finale, only the soft creak of the floor in the hallway. Yumi approached the study. The camera above the bookshelf was already working. In the safe lay the fake token, and beside it on the desk, the first page of the medical report waited for her. She stopped before the door. I saw it on the small phone screen. A hand on the handle, trembling fingers, the face of a person who could still leave. Then Yumi opened the door and went inside. That was all. No loud oath, no confession, no hysteria. Just one step across the threshold, after which a wife became a thief. I turned off the screen and placed the phone beside the bed. I did not need to watch every second after that. Sometimes the most frightening evidence is created in silence. Downstairs, the study lock clicked softly. Yumi began searching for the safe, and I lay in the darkness and for the first time in a long while felt neither anger nor pain, only waiting. Because now their plan had stopped being a conversation, now it had become a crime. Yumi entered my study as carefully as if the house could wake up and call her by name. On the phone screen, I saw only a dark figure by the door, the glint of the hairpin in her hair, and a hand still trembling. She did not go straight to the safe. First, she approached the desk, noticed the medical report, and took the top sheet. I had left that sheet there deliberately, but seeing my wife steal even my illness felt strange. Yumi read slowly. On the page were words about overwork, disturbed sleep, and the need for temporary rest. There was no psychosis, no incompetence, but a person who wants to see weakness needs only half a sentence. She photographed the sheet and sent someone a message, most likely Kaito. Then she knelt before the safe and entered the first combination. Wrong. A second. Wrong as well. I lay in the bedroom with my eyes closed and listened to the quiet electronic beeps through an earpiece. Every wrong entry sounded like another attempt by Yumi to remember who I used to be to her. The third combination worked, our wedding day. I had once told her the code myself, laughing that I would certainly never forget such an important date. In the end, she was the one who did not forget. The safe opened softly, almost obligingly. Yumi froze, as if waiting for an alarm, but the house remained silent. A trap must not slam the door before the animal has entered completely. Inside lay the black token in a velvet case, several documents, and my father's old watch. Yumi did not look at the watch. She did not touch the papers. Her hand immediately reached for the token. She took it out and held it in her palm for a long time. A small thing, almost weightless, but in her eyes it looked like half of my company, freedom from me, and a ticket to the life Kaito had promised her in parking lots. For a second, Yumi turned toward the study door. I saw her face larger than I would have liked. There was no joy there. There was fear, anger, and the stubborn expression of a person convincing herself that it is already too late to cancel the crime. Then she closed the safe, put the medical sheet back slightly crooked, and left. The study lock clicked softly. Downstairs, everything became quiet again, as if the house had not just recorded a theft. I did not get up at once. I lay in the darkness and stared at the ceiling. There was no triumphant music in my head, only one simple thought. The woman I had trusted with my life had just chosen a safe instead of a conversation. 5 minutes later, a message came from Ryu. Marker active. Token has left the house. He added nothing unnecessary. Ryu knew how to understand when a legal victory looked too much like a family death. Yumi returned to the bedroom 20 minutes later. She lay down beside me carefully, trying not to touch me, and did not move for a long time. She smelled of cold air, expensive perfume, and someone else's fear. I turned onto my side as if waking and asked why she was not sleeping. Yumi answered that she had wanted water. Her voice was even, but too dry for a person who had simply gone to the kitchen. I mumbled that tomorrow I would sign the papers if the doctor allowed it. She froze. Then she gently touched my hand and said the most important thing to her was my health. Once, perhaps, I would have believed her. By morning, the token was already with Kaito. He met Yumi in the underground parking lot of a business center, where she arrived wearing dark glasses and without the usual confidence of an expensive woman. On the parking camera recording, he almost tore the case out of her hand. He did not hug her, did not ask how she was. He simply opened the box, saw the token, and smiled truly for the first time in a long while. Yumi said I had slept badly and remembered nothing in the morning. Kaito nodded, but listened only half-heartedly. To him, she had already stopped being a lover and become the person who delivered the needed thing. He checked the token on a laptop right there in the car. The device accepted the key, showed basic owner confirmation, and issued a short notice that it was ready for voting, exactly what Ryu and I had allowed him to see. Kaito exhaled as if he had been holding air in his chest for days. Then he told Yumi that by evening everything would be settled. He would use my temporary access, the medical report, and the token to push the board. Yumi asked what would happen to me. The question did not sound like concern, more like an attempt to understand how much blood would remain on her hands after the deal. Kaito closed the laptop. Kenji will go away to recover. You will get your share? I will save the company from chaos. Everyone will be grateful, except him. He said it as if he had already rehearsed the speech. She reminded him about the debts, about the people who had come to the bar, and about her parents, whose company now hung on my fund. Kaito looked at her sharply. The savior's mask cracked. Do not lecture me about risks, he said. If I do not close this deal, your family will lose its house faster than you can choose a new dress. That was how beautifully he knew how to love. Yumi turned away. For the first time, she heard that in his future, there was no throne for her, only a place beside a man running from creditors and dragging her behind him as useful luggage. But even that did not make her return the token. She got out of the car, adjusted her hair with my hairpin, and went to the elevator. Sometimes a person already understands she is drowning and still keeps holding the stone. Kaito arrived at the office earlier than usual. He no longer portrayed a humble assistant. Now he moved through the floor like a temporary owner, certain that the permanent contract would be signed within hours. The chief financial officer met him near the conference room. Kaito showed him the medical sheet Yumi had photographed during the night and said that my condition required an urgent decision on the management of the patent division. The CFO was not a villain. He was a cautious man who feared a stock collapse more than the founder's personal drama. So he did not agree, but he did not refuse either. That was enough for Kaito. He asked for an extraordinary closed board meeting. Formally, for the protection of the company, in reality, to steal my vote while I was still playing sick. When I was informed about the meeting, I was sitting in Riot's office. 3 folders lay on the table: the recording of the token theft, Kaito's debts, and the Sato family documents. It seemed enough to strike at once. Ryu did not allow it. He said that as long as Kaito merely held the token and prepared a meeting, Attorney Shindo could easily call everything a family misunderstanding and corporate anxiety. We need him to try to use the key, Ryu said. Not just hold it, not just ask. Put it into an official process. I understood it, and hated it, because an official process meant Kaito had to approach the real boundary of a takeover, while I stood nearby and allowed him to almost cross it. What if the board believes him first? I asked. Ryu looked at me over his glasses. Then we will be putting out the fire you helped start. At noon, I arrived at the office. The secretary saw me and immediately stood up. In her eyes was that cautious sympathy people get when they have already heard rumors of your collapse. I walked slowly, leaning on the cane Ryu had insisted I bring. The cane was theater, but the exhaustion inside me no longer required acting. 7 board members sat in the conference room. Kaito stood by the screen, Yumi was by the window, and the CFO leafed through documents with the face of a man hoping the decision would be made without him. When I entered, the conversation stopped. Kaito was the first to approach me. Kenji, you did not need to come. We only wanted to protect the process while you rest. He said it perfectly. Warm voice, open palm, concerned gaze. If I had not heard him during the night, even I might almost have believed him. I sat in my chair at the head of the table, not at once. Slowly, with a pause, as if every movement cost me effort. Yumi watched me too carefully, checking whether I remembered anything about the safe. I said I wanted to listen. Kaito exchanged a glance with the CFO and began the presentation. The first slide read, Temporary Protection of Management Stability, a boring title, again. Traders love boring titles because knives, signatures, and other people's assets are easier to hide beneath them. Kaito spoke about the risks of my overwork, market instability, and the need to entrust investor negotiations to someone capable of acting quickly and rationally. Not once did he say, I want to take the company. He said, we must protect the company from uncertainty. Almost beautiful, almost legal. Then he showed the old patent folder, the one I had authorized access to myself. Several board members tensed. To them, it looked like proof that Kaito was already involved in strategic negotiations. This was where he almost won. I saw it on their faces. Not everyone was against me, not everyone was for him, but some were already thinking not about betrayal, but about stock stability. One independent director asked whether I confirmed the temporary transfer of access. The room turned toward me. Kaito as well. Yumi clenched her fingers on the windowsill. I could have told the truth. I could have played the theft recording. I could have ended everything right there. But then we would have had a scandal without a complete takeover attempt, and too much room for excuses. I looked at Kaito and quietly said, I authorize limited access to the archive. A barely noticeable murmur passed through the room. Kaito smiled almost invisibly. That phrase gave him power. Briefly, but it did. He immediately took the next step and proposed that the board appoint him temporary negotiator for the patent division until my medical report. The CFO requested legal confirmation. Kaito took out the token. The small black object in his hand looked almost innocent. Yumi lowered her eyes. Kenji gave me the confirmation device in advance for emergencies, he said. The lie was so brazen that for several seconds I simply looked at him and said nothing. Ryu sat at the end of the table as an invited lawyer, his face unchanged, but I saw his hand on the folder. If Kaito inserted the token into the process, the recording would stop being a family quarrel and become an attempted legal takeover. Kaito handed the device to the board secretary. The secretary inserted it into the terminal. A confirmation mark appeared on the screen. Several directors exchanged glances. Ryu slowly lifted his eyes. I understood that the system had worked. The token did not merely mark an entry. It tied Kaito's attempt to the time, place, device, and board protocol. But outwardly, everything looked different. Outwardly, Kaito had just received almost official confirmation, and that almost broke the room in his favor. One of the directors said that with the token and medical risks, the issue could be put to a vote immediately. There it was, the real failure that could have happened if Ryu had made even one mistake in the settings. I felt my heart strike harder, not from the game, from the fact that another 5 minutes and the board could have made a decision we would then spend weeks undoing in court. Kaito looked at me with the soft pity of a winner. Kenji, this is temporary. When you recover, we will review everything. He almost placed a hand on my shoulder but changed his mind. I wanted to answer. Ryu beat me to it. He stood and asked that one clarifying question be entered into the protocol. Who exactly had given Kaito the token, and under what circumstances? The room grew quieter. Kaito smiled. Kenji gave it to me personally. Ryu looked at me. I slowly raised my head and said, I do not remember that. The phrase worked strangely. To Kaito, it sounded like confirmation of my weakness. To the board, like alarm. To Yumi, like a knife, because only she knew where the token had come from. Ryu calmly requested that the vote be postponed for 24 hours until the origin of the device was checked. The CFO immediately supported him. He feared scandal more than Kaito. Kaito understood that victory was slipping away by a day. To him, a day was a luxury he did not have. His creditors, investors, and his own lies already demanded results. He leaned over the table and said the delay might cost the company a deal. Then I asked what exact deal he meant, if the board had not yet authorized him to negotiate. That was where he made a mistake. Too small for outsiders, but enough for Ryu. Kaito said that the preliminary terms had already been agreed and required only the board's formal confirmation. Formal, a wonderful word for a man who was already selling what did not yet belong to him. Ryu asked that the phrase be entered into the protocol. Kaito turned sharply toward him, but it was too late. The secretary was already typing. Yumi, by the window, had turned completely pale. The meeting was moved to the next day. Not my victory, not his victory. A suspended state in which every participant left the room with a different version of what had happened. Kaito left first, throwing me a caring phrase about my health as he went. Behind the door, he punched the wall. The sound was dull, but the employees in the hallway heard it. Yumi remained in the conference room a few seconds longer. She looked at the token the secretary had placed in a temporary storage envelope. Her face said she had understood for the first time that a stolen thing can look back. I walked past her, leaning on the cane. She whispered, "You really do not remember?" The question was almost childish, as if she wanted the lie to still work. I stopped beside her and quietly said, I am remembering many things slowly now. After that, I left, leaving her alone with a phrase she could understand any way she wanted. In the office, Ryu closed the door and finally exhaled. That was too close. He did not.
That is why Kaito is dangerous. He does not shout, does not threaten openly, and does not look like an ordinary thief. He speaks the language of the board, investors, and crisis. He almost takes power not by force, but by protocol. That is why Kenji cannot reveal his cards too early.
He did not scold me. He did not praise me. He simply stated the truth I had felt on my skin. Kaito had almost obtained the vote. The board had almost believed his version. One wrong answer from me, one extra minute, and we would no longer have been catching a thief, but trying to return what had already been stolen. Ryu placed a copy of the protocol on the table. It now contained 3 important lines. Kaito presented the token, claimed he had received it from me personally, and admitted to preliminary negotiations without authority. That did not destroy him yet, but it made his next lie heavier. Every new step would now drag the previous one behind it like a chain. By evening, Yumi came home before I did. She did not know the house had already saved the recording of her night visit. She knew only that Kaito had lost one day, and I had again said nothing directly. She was sitting in the living room with a glass of wine when I entered. She still wore that same hairpin. For some reason, I noticed it first. Not her pale face and not the trembling glass. Yumi asked how the meeting went. I looked at her. You spoke with Kaito, didn't you? She lifted her eyes sharply, too sharply for a woman trying to look innocent. He is worried about the company, she said. I slowly removed my jacket. He worried a great deal today, especially when he could not explain where he got my token. The glass in her hand trembled, and a little wine spilled onto the light fabric of the sofa. Before, she would have called a housekeeper. Now she simply stared at the stain. I sat opposite her and said the board would meet again tomorrow. If Kaito provided proof of my authorization, he would receive temporary control over the negotiations. Yumi whispered, and if he does not provide it, I shrugged. Then, I suppose, someone will have to explain how my token ended up in his hands. She looked away, did not confess, did not cry, just became very quiet. In that silence, for the first time, there was not an arrogant wife, but a person who understood the price of one night. Later, I received a message from an unknown number. It contained only a photo of Kaito near a bar and a short line. He owes money. Deadline tomorrow. I forwarded the picture to Ryu. His reply came a minute later. Now we understand why he accelerated. Tomorrow he will not merely pressure the board, he will be desperate. I stood by the study window and looked at the city. Below, cars crawled along wet streets, and somewhere among them Kaito was trying to sell my company faster than his own creditors could reach him. The fourth day began with a theft in my house and ended with a nearly lost board meeting. The trap was working, but it no longer looked clean or safe. Yumi had stopped being only a trader's wife. Kaito had stopped being only a greedy partner. They had both become cornered people, and cornered people sometimes bite harder than confident winners. Before bed, I opened the recording from the study and froze the frame at the moment where Yumi held the token in her palm. There was no malicious delight on her face, only fear and decision. I saved that frame separately, not for court, for myself, so I would not forget that betrayal rarely looks like a demonic smile. More often it looks like a person convincing herself she has no choice. Tomorrow Kaito would have to come to the board with a new lie. Yumi would have to decide whether to keep falling with him, and I would have to endure one more day in the role of a weak man. Only now I was no longer certain that I fully controlled the game, and that was exactly what made the next move truly dangerous. The next morning, Yumi woke earlier than I did. I heard it in the cautious creak of the floor, the soft clink of a cup in the kitchen, and the way the faucet stayed off for too long. She no longer moved through the house like its mistress. Now every step of hers sounded like a question. Do I remember the safe? Do I know about the token? Did I see her in the study last night? When I entered the kitchen, she was already standing by the coffee machine in a light dress, her hair perfectly styled. The antique hairpin was in her hair again, my gift, now looking like a mockery. Yumi smiled and placed a cup before me. I made your coffee stronger. The board is meeting again today, right? Her voice was soft, but her fingers trembled slightly on the saucer. I sat at the table and looked at the cup. A husband who was too attentive would already be suspicious. One too trusting would drink it all at once. I had to choose a third option. I took a small sip. The bitterness was ordinary, but after it, there remained a faint metallic taste on my tongue. Not poison, not a dramatic murder attempt, just something meant to make me slower. Yumi watched me too calmly. In that moment, I understood she had not merely been frightened by yesterday's meeting. Kaito had given her a new order, and she had decided to carry it out at home again. I put the cup back down. Thank you. Today really is a hard day. She exhaled almost imperceptibly as if she had received confirmation that the first step had worked. In the bathroom, I spat out as much coffee as I could and rinsed my mouth with cold water for a long time, but some had already gone in, not fatal, but enough that in half an hour my head would become heavier than it should. I could have canceled the trip. I could have called Raya's doctor and ended the game that morning. But then Yumi would say I was paranoid again, and Kaito would show the board another episode, so I went. And all the way to the office, I felt my own trap begin to scratch me from the inside. Sometimes to catch a traitor, you have to allow him to leave a mark on your skin. Ryu met me at the underground entrance. He looked at my face and immediately understood something was wrong. "You are pale," he said. I answered. The coffee was familial. He did not joke. He only extended his hand. "How much did you drink?" I showed him with my fingers. "A little." Ryu cursed quietly and very old-fashionedly, then took a small sample bag from his briefcase. I gave him the napkin I had wiped my lips with and the remains of the coffee in a small travel bottle. Ryu put everything into the bag and said he would send it to a toxicologist he knew without unnecessary questions. "Do not play the hero today," he added. I looked at the elevator. That is exactly what they are waiting for today, that I will not manage. Ryu pressed his lips together but did not argue. The board gathered in the large hall on the 26th floor. Through the glass, Tokyo was visible, clear and cold, as if the city had deliberately decided to look indifferent to my marriage. Kaito stood by the screen with a different expression on his face. Yesterday, he had almost lost a day. Today, the man who arrived was not a partner, but someone who had been told during the night what a delay would cost. Beside him stood a doctor, a short man in an expensive gray suit with a smooth smile and a folder under his arm. Yumi sat by the wall and did not raise her eyes to me. I recognized the doctor at once, Dr. Naruse. Several years earlier, he had spoken at a closed forum on executive burnout. Back then, he had spoken intelligently. Today, he looked bought. Kaito approached me and said loudly enough, "Kenji, we invited a specialist only for your safety. No one wants to pressure you." A perfect beginning to pressure. I sat down slowly. My head truly was spinning. It was worse than acting because part of the weakness was real, and Kaito saw it. Dr. Naruse began with soft words. He spoke about stress, exhaustion, sleep disturbance, and the need to temporarily restrict access to decisions that could affect thousands of employees. He did not call me insane. He was smarter than that. He called me overloaded, tired, temporarily unable to carry full responsibility. Such words pass through a board more easily. Ryu asked him to clarify whether he had conducted a full examination. Naruse answered that he relied on family observations, documents from my spouse, and behavior at recent meetings. So you did not examine me personally, I said. My voice came out quieter than I wanted. Kaito immediately intervened. Kenji, you do not need to defend yourself. This is not an attack. I turned to him. The room tilted slightly, and I hated Yumi for that coffee almost more than for the token, because now my weakness looked too convincing. Then why is the doctor speaking about my vote on the board? I asked. Narusa opened the folder and showed a recommendation for temporarily restricting participation in critical votes. The CFO tensed. Several board members exchanged glances. To them, this was no longer family drama. It was becoming a question of company management. Kaito seized the moment. He said that yesterday's voting delay had already frightened investors, and the preliminary deal could fall apart if the board did not appoint a temporary representative by the end of the day. I looked at him and saw not a friend, not a partner, not my wife's lover. I saw a debtor with only a few hours left before the people from the bar reached him, and that made him more dangerous. Ryu stood and asked to postpone the discussion until an independent examination. Kaito immediately answered that an independent examination would take weeks, and the market would not wait for our internal emotions. The word market always works better on a board than the word betrayal. People may not understand your pain, but they understand a falling stock price perfectly. One director asked me directly whether I was willing to voluntarily appoint a temporary negotiator to reduce tension. Yesterday, such a question would have been impossible. Today, it sounded almost reasonable. I wanted to say no. I wanted to slam the token theft recording directly onto the table. But the doctor, the coffee, the rumors, yesterday's token, and the old archive had already built too tight a frame around me. If I exploded now, they would not see a founder protecting the company. They would see a sick husband accusing his wife and friend of a conspiracy. So I did what Kaito did not expect. I said I was willing to support a temporary negotiator, but only for 48 hours and only under the supervision of the legal committee. The room became quiet. Kaito blinked. He had wanted full leverage. I gave him half, but publicly, on the record, and with a limitation, he could now hardly refuse without suspicion. Ryu looked at me as if he wanted to kill me, and praised me at the same time. The CFO exhaled with relief. To him, compromise sounded like salvation from scandal. Kaito quickly rebuilt his face. That is reasonable, he said. Thank you, Kenji. I knew you would put the company above your personal condition. Personal condition? What careful filth. The decision passed by majority. Not a full transfer of power. Not a company seizure. But Kaito received the official right to conduct negotiations for 48 hours. It was his victory. Real, unpleasant, signed by the board. I sat at the head of the table and understood that in those 2 days he could manage enough that we would then have to tear the company back with our teeth. When the meeting ended, Yumi left first. She did not look at me or at Kaito. Too much had happened in front of witnesses, and her own role had suddenly become dangerous even to her. Kaito lingered by the door and leaned toward me. Rest, old man. I will handle it. This time I did not answer. Sometimes the best response to an enemy who has won is to let him enjoy it too early. In the office, Ryu closed the door and set a glass of water in front of me. You understand you just gave him an official platform? I nodded. I understand. And you understand that your wife probably gave you a sedative? He asked. I looked at my hands. They were still too heavy. Now it will be more than probable. Ryu sent the sample to the laboratory and at the same time requested the recordings from the home kitchen. Not for a beautiful scene, for one simple question. What exactly did Yumi add to my cup? An hour later, the first answer came from the toxicologist. A mild prescription sedative had been found in the coffee. The dose was small, but enough to impair concentration and reaction. Ryu placed the phone on the table. This is a criminal matter, Kenji? I closed my eyes. The words brought no relief. No one feels better because his wife is now breaking not only her vows, but the law. The home camera had not shown everything. Yuma's back was turned when she added the drops to the cup, but it was visible how she took a small vial from her cosmetics bag and immediately hid it after I entered. That was not yet enough for the final blow, but it was enough to make her vulnerable. If she began denying everything, the lab and the recording would place her beside the coffee. While Ryu was gathering documents, Kaito was already using his temporary power. He scheduled a closed meeting with representatives of Astrid Capital, a fund that had long been interested in my patent portfolio. I knew that fund. Aggressive, fast, fond of buying other people's problems for less than their true price. That was exactly where Kaito had to run if creditors were already standing at the door. He could not sell the patents directly, but he could sign a preliminary letter of intent, create pressure on the board, and receive an advance. For him, the advance mattered more than the future. I asked Ryu whether we could stop the meeting. He replied that formally, Kaito was acting within the temporary board decision. There it was, the price of my concession. So he made it in time, I said. Ryu looked at me coldly. No, he received the right to try. The difference is small, but sometimes court cases live exactly inside it. That evening, Kaito arrived at a closed restaurant in Akasaka. With him were two fund representatives, the CFO, and a lawyer who did not ask unnecessary questions as long as he was paid. Kaito spoke confidently. He showed the old patent archive, referred to my condition, the board's decision, and the urgent need to stabilize negotiations. The fund representatives listened carefully. They were not Kaito's friends. People like that are never friends. They looked at him as a man who had brought them someone else's property and was in a great hurry. One of them asked why the founder himself was not present. Kaito smiled. Kenji is currently undergoing medical recovery. The board has entrusted me with temporary supervision of the process. The phrase sounded smooth, almost official. If I had heard it without context, I might also have believed it was concern for the company, not the sale of someone else's house through a window. The fund offered an advance for the exclusive right to negotiate, not a purchase, not a patent transfer, but money Kaito could show his creditors as proof of approaching salvation. He almost signed. The pen was already in his hand when the CFO suddenly asked to add a clause about the temporary negotiator's personal responsibility for exceeding authority. I had not asked him to do that. It was his own decision. Maybe he was finally frightened. Maybe he saw too much haste in Kaito's eyes. Kaito froze. The fund did not object. They did not care who would be guilty if the deal collapsed. They simply wanted the right to enter first. Kaito signed, slowly, too slowly for a winner. Because now his name stood under a document where every extra phrase could become a noose. When he came out of the restaurant, Yumi was waiting for him in the car. She wanted to hear that everything had worked, that money was nearby, that the humiliation at the boutique and her parents' fear would soon pay off. Kaito sat beside her and closed the door. "We have an advance," he said. Yumi exhaled. "So it is ending?" He looked at her like a person who had understood nothing. "No," he said. "Now we need to make sure Kenji cannot cancel this in 48 hours. Yumi turned pale. "How?" Kaito took a copy of Narusa's report from his pocket. "The doctor is ready to strengthen the recommendation, but he needs your observations. In writing, that Kenji is dangerous to himself and the company." Yumi recoiled, not from morality, from the scale. It was one thing to put a weak substance into coffee and steal a token. It was another to officially sign that her husband was dangerous. "You promised that after the token, it would all be over," she said. Kaito turned sharply. "I promised you a life without him. Do you think things like that are given in one night?" She was silent. He took out an envelope and placed it on her knees. Inside was a personal statement form for a spouse. A simple piece of paper that could turn my temporary weakness into a long legal war. Yumi asked what would happen if she did not sign. Kaito looked at her wearily, almost contemptuously. "Then your parents will find out who brought me the token, and so will Kenji." Quietly, she said, "You are no different from him anymore." Kaito laughed without a smile. "From him? Kenji can at least afford to be noble. You and I no longer can." That was how their romance finally became an IOU. Not love, not freedom, not a new life. Only one person's fear of creditors and another's fear of falling. I received the audio of that meeting later that night, not complete, not perfect. In Yumi's car, the recording sometimes went dead, but the key phrases were clear enough. Ryu listened beside me and took notes. When Kaito demanded the written spouse statement, he stopped the recording and said, "That will be the main lever. Let her sign it." I looked at him. "You want to let her sign?" Ryu answered. "I want the court to see that she did not simply steal a token, but consciously built a medical legend." I did not like the answer, because somewhere inside me still lived a man who remembered Yumi before all these folders, pills, and safes. Ryu noticed it and said more quietly, "She already gave you a drug this morning. Are you still waiting for her to stop on her own?" I did not answer, because the answer was too pathetic. Late that night, Yumi came home. She entered the bedroom with that same envelope in her bag. I sat by the window in a robe, looking like a man who could not sleep. She stopped in the doorway. "Are you feeling better?" she asked. I looked at her. During the day it was strange, as if my thoughts were floating. Her face became motionless. "Probably stress," she said. I nodded. "Probably." We both said that word as if it could cover the table between us and hide the blood on the tablecloth. She came closer and sat beside me. In her hands was a new folder, not blue, but white, softer, more familial. My name was already on the first page. Yumi said Dr. Naruse had asked her to describe my nighttime episodes, memory lapses, and flashes of irritability. She said it almost tenderly, as if dictating a story of care to a doctor. I asked whether she had seen all of that herself. Yumi did not answer at once. Then she said, "I live with you. Of course I see it." In that moment, she took the next step. I took the folder and slowly leafed through the pages. There were prepared phrases about my confusion, suspiciousness, and the danger of sudden decisions. Kaito worked carefully. Yumi only had to add her signature and a few personal details. "Do you truly think I am dangerous?" I asked. She looked into my eyes. For a second, something flickered there. Maybe memory, maybe shame, maybe just exhaustion. Then she said, "I think you need help," and signed the statement right in front of me, on the small table by the window. I watched her hand, the same hand I had held on our wedding day, the same hand that had opened my safe at night. Now it was turning a lie into a document. When Yumi finished, she placed the folder on the table and said she was doing this for us. I almost asked whom she meant by that word. Instead, I nodded and said I was tired. She went into the bathroom, and I photographed every page and sent them to Ryu. The reply came a minute later. "Now we have a chain. Coffee, token, board, statement. Next, he will drag her to the bottom himself." I closed the message and looked at the bathroom door. Water was running behind it. Yumi was probably washing tears, cosmetics, or the last remnants of doubt from her face. 2 hours later, Kaito received her statement and sent it to Dr. Naruse. Naruse confirmed that he was ready to appear at the next board meeting with a stronger recommendation for my temporary removal. Meanwhile, Kaito was already showing his creditors the signed agreement with the fund. The money had not arrived yet, but he finally had a piece of paper that looked like salvation. I stood in the study and looked at the map of the entire scheme Ryu had laid out on the wall. Yumi, Kaito, the doctor, the board, the fund, loans. Now this was no affair. It was a conspiracy with documents. But Kaito still had 48 hours of official power. Yumi had a signed statement, the doctor had a prepared legend, and I still did not have the right to strike too early. Kaito had received an advance, temporary status, and a new medical attack. Yumi had finally signed her name beneath my weakness. But now both of them had left traces that could no longer be called a misunderstanding. And if I endured one more day, their own documents would begin speaking louder than my accusations. In the morning, the house was too quiet. Yumi sat opposite me at breakfast and pretended to read the news, though her phone screen had long since gone dark. Between us on the table stood a cup of coffee I no longer touched. She noticed. Of course she noticed. Yumi might not see my pain, but she saw perfectly everything that interfered with her plan. Her gaze slid to the cup, then to my face, then down again. "Do you not like the coffee?" she asked. Her voice was ordinary, almost tender. I shrugged and said that after yesterday, I felt a little nauseous. That was the truth, just not the one she wanted to hear. Yumi nodded too quickly. "You really need to rest." Kaito said the board may officially take part of the burden off you today. There it was. She was no longer circling the topic. I looked at her across the edge of the table. "Kaito talks a great deal about my burden." Yumi held her breath but kept the smile. "Because he is your partner. He worries about the company. Once, I would have asked whether he worried about me. Now I did not. Some questions humiliate not the person being asked, but the person who still hopes to hear a human answer." Before leaving, I went into the study and opened the safe. The real token had long been with Ryu, but I still looked at the empty place in the case. Sometimes the absence of a thing speaks louder than the thing itself. On the desk stood a framed photograph from our wedding. In the picture, Yumi smiled so openly that for a second I found it hard to breathe. Not because I missed the woman she was today, but because the girl in that photograph may once have truly existed. I put the frame into a drawer, did not break it, did not throw it away, simply closed it. Some feelings also need a temporary archive, otherwise they interfere with finishing the matter. Ryu was waiting for me in the car. He got into the back seat, handed me a printout of the laboratory analysis, and said without greeting, there was an anti-anxiety drug in the coffee, mild but at an active dose. I read the sheet. The name of the drug was familiar. Dr. Naruse prescribed it to patients with insomnia, if open medical materials, and Naruse's own words in an old lecture were to be believed. She could say it was my medicine, I said. Ryu nodded. She can. That is why we need more than the drug. We need the chain, the vial, her hand, your cup, and the meeting where they used your weakness. I folded the paper in half. She will sign anything Kaito gives her. Ryu looked out the window. Not anything. People usually stop not from conscience, but when they understand their partner will hand them over first. That phrase stuck in my head harder than the analysis. Yumi was already afraid of Kaito. I had seen it, but her fear of him was still smaller than her fear of losing the life she had built on my money. At the office elevators, the board secretary met me. She said the meeting had been moved up an hour at Kaito's request. He was in a hurry. That meant the outside pressure had grown stronger. I went up to the board floor and saw two unfamiliar men in the corridor. Not employees, not investors. They stood too calmly and looked not at the signs but at the conference room doors. Kaito walked past them without greeting them, but his shoulders tensed. The men did not nod either. That was what creditors looked like when they no longer needed words. Ryu noticed their gaze and said quietly, "Now we know why he wants a decision today." I answered, "If I were kinder, I might pity him." Ryu snorted. "Fortunately, the day for kindness is already booked." Dr. Naruse was already sitting in the conference room. Beside him lay a folder with the new report and Yuma's statement, signed at night by the window. The white folder looked clean, only on the outside. Kaito opened the meeting without a long introduction. He spoke about risks, investors, the founder's health, and the need to make a decision before the end of the day. He never raised his voice. Panic in an expensive suit can also be disciplined. Then Naruse was given the floor. The doctor stood and said that the family observations of the spouse confirmed deterioration in my condition, memory lapses, suspiciousness, nighttime episodes, and inadequate reactions to ordinary work questions. Yumi sat opposite me and looked at the table. I saw only her profile and the silver hairpin in her hair. She did not raise her eyes while the doctor turned her lie into a medical recommendation. Ryu asked that the source of each observation be read aloud. Naruse opened Yuma's statement and began listing dates. Several episodes were real but turned inside out. Fatigue became an episode. Silence became confusion. My questions became paranoia. That was why Yuma's lie was more dangerous than crude forgery. She did not invent everything from nothing. She took pieces of our life, cut away the context, and assembled a sick husband from them. One director asked me whether I remembered nighttime walks around the house and conversations about the safe. Kaito raised his eyes. Yumi shrank. Ryu slowly turned toward me. I could have answered directly. I could have said I remembered her theft, but then we would be striking too soon again. So I said, "I remember that I have been sleeping badly lately." That phrase worked against me. Several directors exchanged glances. Kaito relaxed almost imperceptibly. He heard a confession of weakness, not a trap. Naruse gently added that exactly such partial admissions are often seen in executives who fear losing control. It was said cleanly, almost beautifully, very vile. Ryu stood and asked whether the doctor had conducted blood analysis, in-person diagnostics, cognitive testing, or at least a full consultation with me. Naruse answered that, in an urgent corporate situation, one sometimes has to rely on available data from a spouse and a partner interested in the transfer of authority, Ryu asked. The room grew colder. Kaito immediately intervened, calling it an attack on people trying to help. The CFO asked everyone to return to the issue of the deal with the fund. He did not want to dissect my marriage. He wanted to protect the stock, the reputation, and his own position. Kaito used that moment perfectly. He announced that Astrid Capital was ready to transfer the advance today, but only if his temporary authority over the entire patent block was confirmed. The entire patent block. Yesterday, it had been negotiations. Today, he was asking for more. As always, a thief first slips his hand through the window, then explains that he needs the whole door for the safety of the house. I looked at the board and understood that some people were already ready to agree. They saw not a friend who had stolen a token, but a confident manager with a doctor, documents, and the promise of money. This was Kaito's second real victory. The first had given him 48 hours. The second could give him the entire patent block under the guise of temporary management. Ryu asked that the protocol state that the expansion of authority was being proposed before the independent verification of the token's origin had been completed. Kaito frowned, but could not object directly. Quietly, I said, I agree to an independent verification. Naruse immediately turned toward me. Kenji, right now it is important not to resist every step. He spoke like a doctor. He sounded like Kaito's lawyer. I looked at him. Doctor, did you examine me today? He paused. I am observing your reaction. I nodded. Then observe as I request an independent physician. For the first time that morning, several directors looked not at Kaito, but at me. A small shift. Not enough. But a crack appeared in the room again. Kaito understood this and took out his final argument. He placed on the table a copy of the preliminary agreement with Astrid Capital and the clause about the temporary negotiator's personal responsibility. I have already put my name under the risk, he said. While Kenji doubts, I am protecting the company with my own responsibility. A good speech, almost heroic, almost. The board went into closed discussion without us. We remained in the adjacent room. Me, Ryu, Yumi, Kaito, and Naruse. 5 people who understood perfectly what was truly being decided beyond the wall. Kaito walked to the window and said without looking at me, "You could simply rest. No one wants to destroy you," I answered. "Strange. You are doing it very diligently." Yumi sharply raised her eyes. Kaito smiled. "That is what the doctor is talking about. You see enemies where people are trying to help." He spoke loudly. "For Naruse, for the future protocol, for the wall." I took a step closer. My head was still heavy from yesterday's drug, but my voice had returned. "Kaito, if you are helping me, why are your creditors waiting for you by the elevator?" The smile vanished. Naruse lowered his gaze to the folder. Yumi looked at Kaito so quickly that she revealed more fear than she wanted. Kaito whispered, "Careful." I answered quietly, "You were the first to tell everyone about my health. Do not be surprised that you have symptoms too." The door opened and the secretary invited us back. The board had reached a compromise decision. Kaito would receive expanded temporary authority for patent negotiations for 72 hours, but all documents would be subject to Riot's legal control. 72 hours, not 48. He had received more time than he had asked for yesterday, and nearly the scope of authority he wanted. Legal control was our safety line, but not a wall. Kaito won in the room. Not completely, but enough to smile without a mask now. He thanked the board, said a few words about stability, and turned to me with an expression of mournful concern. I did not applaud. I simply sat there and felt my own game give him space again. If he managed enough in those 3 days, the proof might arrive too late. After the meeting, Yumi tried to leave with Kaito, but he did not even stop for her. He walked quickly toward the elevators, dialing the fund's number. Now he needed money, not the woman who had helped open the safe. Yumi remained alone in the corridor. I approached her. She looked at the closed elevator doors as if she were seeing her future life without beautiful music for the first time. "He did not even ask how you were," I said. She flinched. "Do not start." I did not press. Kaito was now applying pressure better than I could. I only said, "When he starts choosing whom to surrender first, remember this elevator." She turned away, but did not answer. That was better than denial. That evening, Kaito went to Astrid Capital's office. This time, not to a restaurant, but to a closed conference room, where the walls were glass and people's gazes were harder than any contract. The fund representatives already knew about the board's decision. They congratulated him on the expanded authority and immediately proposed speeding up the exclusive agreement. Behind the beautiful words stood a simple meaning: sell cheaper while you are pinned down. Kaito tried to bargain, badly. A person with debt always bargains worse than a person with money. The fund saw his haste and lowered the terms with every new clarification. At one point, one of the fund partners said, "We need not the old archive, but access to the active patent applications." Kaito froze. That was the boundary he was not supposed to cross. He had no right to provide active applications. Even the board's temporary authority did not allow him to transfer them to a third party without my confirmation and full legal approval. Kaito asked for a pause and stepped into the hallway. First, he called Yumi, not me, not a lawyer, not the CFO, the woman who had already stolen one key. "I need a second access," he said. Yumi was silent. "No," she finally answered. Her voice was weak, but it was still the first real no. Kaito did not shout. He became worse. He reminded her of Narusa's statement, the coffee, the token, her parents' debts, and the fact that Ryu already held their company by the throat. "If I fall, you fall first," he said, "because you are the wife, because you opened the safe, because you signed the medical lie." Yumi sat in the car by the house and listened as her lover arranged her guilt neatly on shelves. In that moment, she probably finally understood that Kaito had never intended to save her. I received the recording of that call 20 minutes later. Ryu listened beside me and, for the first time, did not take notes. Sometimes even a lawyer understands that a document is no longer needed because a person has pronounced his own sentence. Kaito returned to the conference room and told the fund that the active applications would be available after morning confirmation. He lied again, but now his lie had become urgent and dangerous. The fund agreed to wait until morning. In exchange, they prepared an advance payment that was to go to Kaito's structure immediately after confirmation. His creditors would get a reprieve, the company would get a knife under its ribs. Ryu said that in the morning, Kaito would try to obtain the second access through me, Yumi, or a forged board order. That meant the next night would be the last one before his riskiest move. I returned home late. Yumi was sitting in the study, not hiding, simply sitting in the chair by the window, holding the very same white folder with the statement about my instability. She raised her eyes to me. "You know?" Her voice was quiet. No mask, no sweetness, no familiar contempt. Just the tired voice of a person who had realized the walls had shifted. I did not ask what exactly she meant. There were too many options. The token, the coffee, the statement, Kaito, her parents, the safe, our marriage, which she herself had dismantled into signatures. "Enough," I said. She closed her eyes. A tear slid down her cheek. I felt no victory, only a dull pain because a tear did not cancel what she had already done. Yumi whispered, "He forced me." I sat opposite her. The first time, she opened her mouth and could not answer. That was the whole question. Kaito had pressured her, yes, threatened her, yes, used her fear, but he had not guided her hand to the safe that first night. He had not forced her to smile at me over breakfast. He had not invented caring phrases instead of the truth. I said, "Tomorrow he will ask for the second access to the active applications." Yumi looked at me as if I had already been present in her phone conversation. In a sense, I had. "I will not give it," she said, very quietly, almost inaudibly. I answered, "He will not ask politely." She clenched the folder. Then what should I do? A strange moment. The woman who had tried to strip me of my vote in the company was now asking me how to survive without other people's orders. I could have said, "Go to Ryu." I could have said, "Confess." I could have said, "Too late." Instead, I said, "Tomorrow morning, you will tell him yes." Yumi raised her head. Fear returned to her eyes. "What?" I repeated. "You will say you will obtain the second access, and you will lead him to the place where he himself asks for the impossible." She looked at me for a long time. "You want to use me?" I almost laughed. Not from amusement, from how late she had found that word. "No," I said. "I am giving you your first choice in all this time. Continue with him to the end, or stop where the truth can still be spoken." Yumi lowered her gaze to the white folder. Then she asked what would happen to her parents. There it was. Not what would happen to us, not what would happen to me. First the parents, the house, the name, the life raft. I answered honestly. If they acknowledge the debts and stop covering for you, Ryu will give them a restructuring. If they continue playing old aristocracy, the fund will take everything under the contract. She nodded slowly, not gratefully, simply accepting that the world no longer promised her soft exits. Sometimes that is the first step toward truth. That night, I barely slept. In the neighboring room, Yumi spoke with her father. I heard fragments. Debts, Kenji, Kaito, documents, please. Her voice broke, but it no longer pretended to care. Mr. Sato shouted at first, then begged, then said a phrase she may remember better than any accusation of mine. "You sold the man who fed all of us." After that, the house became quiet, very quiet. Yumi did not come to me. I did not go to her either. Some conversations have to burn down inside before a person can say them aloud. In the morning, Kaito called her at 7:15. I sat beside Ryu in a car near the house and listened through the official recording channel that had now become part of our evidence package. Yumi answered after the third ring. Kaito did not greet her. "Do you have access to his study?" She closed her eyes and said, "Yes. Tonight you will take the second key," he said. "Not a fake, not a family toy. I need access to the active applications." There was no love left in his voice. Yumi asked where to meet. Kaido named an old conference room in the auxiliary office, rarely used after the pandemic. A place without extra witnesses, or so he thought. She agreed. Then she disconnected the phone and sat in the kitchen for a long time without moving. I looked at the screen and understood that now, for the first time, she was truly afraid not of me, but of her own choice. Ryu.
Yumi did not become good overnight. That matters. She did not return to Kenji out of love, and tears did not cleanse her. She simply understood that Kaito would sacrifice her first. Sometimes the truth does not begin with repentance, but with the fear of becoming the next victim.
Ryu put the phone away. If she does not come to us by evening, we assume she chose him. I nodded. I know. But inside, there still remained one last foolish hope. During the day, Kaito sent the board an updated plan for negotiations with the fund. It did not directly transfer patents, but it contained formulations that opened access to active applications under the guise of an independent evaluation. The CFO forwarded the document to Ryu with one word: dangerous. Good. That meant not everyone in the room had fully believed Kaito. Bad. That meant Kaito had almost convinced them that the danger was acceptable. Ryu and I prepared a counter-opinion, but did not send it. As long as Kaito was only writing a paper, he could still retreat. We needed him to voice the demand aloud and tie it to Yumi. That evening, I sat in a car near the auxiliary office and watched the light in the windows of the old conference room. Beside me, Ryu checked the recording. Cameras were already inside, officially installed by the building's security service after equipment thefts the previous year. Yumi entered first. No jewelry, no expensive coat, none of her old confidence. She wore a simple dark blouse. She had removed the hairpin. Kaito appeared 10 minutes later. He looked almost sick with tension. His lip had not yet healed from the meeting at the bar, and shadows lay beneath his eyes. He did not hug Yumi. He did not even try. He simply asked, "Where is the key?" She answered, "First tell me what happens to me after the deal." Kaito looked at her as if the question were indecent. "After the deal, we all stay alive." Yumi shook her head. "I'm not asking about your creditors. I am asking about me." He smirked. "You will get money. Your parents' house will remain yours. Kenji will go away to recover. What else do you need?" Quietly she answered, "For you to stop threatening me." For 1 second, the room became very quiet. Kaito stepped closer. "Yumi, you came to me yourself. You brought the documents yourself. You opened the safe yourself. Do not pretend to be a prisoner." The phrase was filthy, but honest. Yumi flinched as if he had struck her not with his hand, but with a mirror. Then she took a small case from her bag. Kaito extended his hand. "Give it." She did not hand it over at once. "If I do, will you delete my messages and the statement?" He laughed. "You still think you can set conditions?" He grabbed the case. At that moment, Yumi said, "Kenji was right. You will surrender me first." Kaito froze, not because he felt shame, because he heard someone else's phrase in her voice. He sharply turned toward the door. "Is he here?" Yumi was silent. Kaito opened the case and saw inside not a token, but an empty metal plate with a small engraving. On it was written, "Say it louder." The conference room door opened. I entered first, Ryu behind me, and behind him a security officer and a representative of the board's legal committee. Kaito looked at me as if I had emerged from the nightmare he had spent all morning trying to postpone until tomorrow. In his hand was the empty plate, and a red recording indicator was already glowing on the table. I said, "You requested second access to the active applications in front of witnesses, Kaito. Repeat it if I misunderstood." He was silent. Yumi stood by the window and did not look at him. Her hands trembled, but she did not try to run. For the first time all this time, she stayed in the room after the lie was exposed. Kaito slowly placed the case on the table. Then he smiled. Badly, too late, but still dangerously. "Kenji, you look obsessed. Breaking into a private meeting between your wife and partner with security? The doctor will like that." He tried once again to turn the room against me, and that was exactly why I did not say a word about love, marriage, or betrayal. I simply nodded to Ryu Ryu placed on the table copies of the board decision, the contract with the fund, the meeting recording, the report on the sedative, and a transcript of the night call where Kaito demanded the second access. "This is no longer a private meeting," Ryu said. "This is an attempt to obtain the key to active patent applications after a temporary board decision, and under pressure on the owner's spouse." Kaito looked at Yumi. "You recorded me?" She finally turned. "You spoke loudly enough yourself." Her voice was weak, but it belonged to her. I expected him to shout, but Kaito did the smarter thing. He sat down, folded his hands on the table, and said he was ready to convene the board immediately, because my behavior confirmed the medical concerns. He was not surrendering. More than that, he still had a chance. If he turned this meeting into an example of my paranoia, Naruse would help him hold part of the power until the official review. Ryu leaned toward me and said quietly, "Now only publicly. In closed rooms he will twist everything against you." I nodded. Kaito stood and adjusted his jacket. "See you at the board tomorrow, Kenji." He walked past me toward the door, paused for a second, and added almost in a whisper, "You think she chose you? She simply chose the one who is stronger right now." I did not answer, because part of me knew he had not hit fully but close. Yumi had not returned out of love, she had returned out of fear. The fear had simply changed direction. When the door closed, Yumi quietly said, "I can testify." Ryu looked at her without trust. Testimony or an attempt to negotiate? She did not take offense. She had nothing left from which to build dignity. "Testimony," she repeated, "but I want my parents not to lose the house." There it was again. Truth without decoration. Not love, not remorse. A deal. I looked at her, and for the first time in many days, felt not anger, but tired understanding. Yumi had not become good. She had simply finally stopped pretending to be innocent. "Ryu will draft the terms," I said. "You will tell everything. About the coffee, the safe, Narusa's statement, Kaito and his threats. No pretty version for yourself." Yumi nodded. Tears were running down her face again. This time I did not try to decide whether they were real. Their quality no longer determined anything. That night Ryu prepared a package for the legal committee and the independent medical commission. Tomorrow the board had to see not my hurt, but their chain of actions. But Kaito was preparing too. He sent the directors a letter calling the meeting in the conference room proof of my uncontrolled behavior and pressure on Yumi. Attached to the letter were Narusa's report, the decision on temporary authority, and the contract with the fund. He was still dangerous because he knew how to make a lie resemble order. Yumi had taken the first step toward confession. Kaito had lost the chance at the second key. But tomorrow, he would stand before the board with a doctor, a contract, and a story about my breakdown. And for the first time, I could no longer afford to play only a weak man. Tomorrow, I would have to step into the room and show which of us was truly sick with greed. The morning began with Kaito's letter. He had sent it to the entire board, the legal committee, and two largest shareholders, as if he wanted not to discuss the crisis, but to fix my illness in place before I entered the room. In the letter, he wrote that yesterday's meeting in the auxiliary office had become proof of my dangerous behavior. In his version, I had burst in there with security, pressured Yumi, and tried to disrupt lawful negotiations. He did not mention the second access. He did not mention the threats. He did not mention the sedative in the coffee or the token stolen from my safe. A good lie always knows how to choose silence around the necessary places. Attached to the letter were Dr. Narusa's report, Yumi's statement about my episodes, and the agreement with Astrid Capital. Kaito gathered everything that could look official and hid everything that smelled of crime. I read the letter in the car on the way to the office. Ryu sat beside me and said nothing. When I finished, he said only one thing: he is smarter when cornered. It was true. Confident Kaito grew greedy. Frightened, Kaito built a defense faster than many people build attacks, and today he had come not to win beautifully, but to survive at any cost. Yumi rode in another car. Ryu insisted she not appear beside me before the meeting. If Kaito saw her with me too early, he would immediately change his line of defense. She had to enter the room not as my wife who had returned home, but as someone Kaito still considered a convenient weak link. Before leaving, she sent me one message: "I will tell the truth." I looked at those 4 words longer than necessary, not because I fully believed her, because once I would have very much wanted to believe. Ryu noticed my gaze and took the phone from my hand. Do not build expectations. A person who lied for a long time to save herself can start telling the truth for the same reason. I nodded. He was right. Yumi had not become a saint overnight. But today I did not need sainthood. I needed a sequence of facts that Kaito could not call my fantasy. Business press journalists were already standing at the office entrance. Someone had leaked news of the extraordinary board meeting and possible transfer of the patent block. Kaito was again working the public version before us. I walked past the cameras slowly, leaning on the cane. Flashes struck my eyes. One journalist asked whether it was true I was stepping back from management due to a medical condition. I stopped for a second and answered, "Today the board will hear the documents. After that you will hear me." Ryu quietly exhaled beside me. Not the perfect lawyer's phrase, but better than the silence of a sick man. In the elevator, he looked at me sternly. "Do not improvise too much." I smirked. "Says the man who yesterday offered my wife the chance to become a witness." Ryu did not smile. "That is exactly why I am nervous." The boardroom was full. In addition to the directors, representatives of the legal committee, internal audit, and 2 outside shareholder observers had come. Kaito wanted a stage. We got a hall. He stood by the screen beside Dr. Naru's. Neat folders lay on the table before him, and his face wore the expression of a man who had rehearsed calm all night. Yumi sat at the far end of the room, not beside me, not beside Kaito, between 2 of Ryu's lawyers. She was not wearing the hairpin. I noticed it at once and for some reason felt a strange emptiness. Kaito began first. He spoke about stability, responsibility, and the need to finish negotiations with the fund before the markets closed. Every word sounded like concern for the company, not an attempt to close a personal debt. Then he moved on to me. He did not call me dangerous directly. He said my condition raised serious questions, and yesterday's appearance at the auxiliary office had confirmed the doctor's concerns. Naruse rose after him. He spoke softly and confidently, like a man accustomed to selling diagnoses for the money of people afraid of loud words. He again listed fatigue, confusion, and increased suspiciousness. Ryu asked him to clarify who exactly had provided the doctor with the main observations. Naruse pointed to the spouse's statement. Yumi did not move, but I saw her fingers tighten on the edge of the chair. Kaito immediately added that the spouse had been forced to tell the truth because she was worried not only about her husband, but also about thousands of employees. Excellent. He was already using her as a shield. Ryu stood and asked permission to ask Yumi several questions before the vote. Kaito objected, stating that psychological pressure on the spouse would only confirm my instability. The CFO unexpectedly intervened. She signed a key statement. The board must understand the source. His voice trembled, but the phrase sounded firm. Sometimes cowardice also gets tired of being convenient. The chairman permitted the questions. Yumi slowly rose. The room was quiet. Even Kaito did not move. He looked at her as if reminding her without words. "You are in this too." Ryu asked whether she had written the statement about my episodes herself. Yumi opened her mouth, closed it, then said, "No." Kaito prepared the wording. Dr. Naruse saw the text before I signed. The room grew cold. Naruse adjusted the folder. Kaito smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. "Yumi is under pressure now," he said. "We all see who is sitting beside her." Yumi turned to him. "You brought me the form yourself." In the car, after the meeting with the fund, her voice was weak, but the words held steady. That mattered more than volume. Ryu asked why she had signed. Yumi looked not at me but at the board, because I was afraid. Kaito threatened to give Kenji my messages, the doctor's documents, and the recording where I opened the safe. Kaito stood abruptly. "That is a lie." Finally, the first coarse word of the morning. The first step of a man who had stopped controlling the room's temperature. Ryu placed a transcript of the night call on the table. Not all of it, only the fragments where Kaito demanded the second access, reminded Yumi about the safe, and said she would fall first. The board chairman asked for the audio to be played. Kaito objected that the recording was illegal. Ryu calmly answered that the recording had been provided by a participant in the conversation, and Yumi had confirmed in writing her consent to its use. The recording played through the speakers. Kaito's voice sounded muffled but clear. "You opened the safe yourself. You signed the medical lie yourself." After that phrase, even Naruse stopped looking at his papers. Yumi stood pale, but did not sit. Kaito slowly turned to her. "You do not understand what you are doing," she answered. "For the first time in a long while, I do." This was not beautiful redemption. She did not become a heroine, but in that second, she at least stopped being his tool. For today's room, that was enough. Kaito shifted the attack faster than I expected. He said Yumi was trying to shift the blame onto him because she feared divorce and the financial consequences after the family accounts had been restricted. A good move. He made her not a witness but an offended wife saving herself. A half-truth again looked more dangerous than a pure lie. Ryu did not argue with emotions. He showed the laboratory report on the coffee, the kitchen recording, and a doctor's notice about the drug Naruse indeed used in his practice. Naruse turned pale. I did not prescribe that to Mr. Tanaka. Ryu turned to him. Excellent. Then explain why your recommendation was built on the behavior of a man who had been given a sedative without prescription. Noise began in the room. The chairman struck the table with his palm and demanded silence. Kaito stepped forward, trying to regain control, but now every step he took looked too fast. He said the drug could have been my personal medication, and Yumi might have confused the dosage out of concern. Yumi closed her eyes. Even she was disgusted by how easily he placed blame back into her hands. For the first time, I spoke myself. Kaito, if you were truly protecting the company, why did you ask Yumi yesterday for second access to the active patent applications? He turned to me. Because the fund required an independent evaluation. I nodded. Then why did you not request it through the legal committee, as the board decision requires? He paused for a fraction of a second. Very little, but in a room where everyone had begun counting his pauses, that was enough. Ryu showed the draft of Kaito's letter to the fund, where the active applications were called accessible after morning confirmation. The document had no signature, but his name was in the sender field, and the time was after yesterday's decision. Kaito said it was a draft. Ryu nodded. Then you will not object to a review of all drafts and correspondence with the fund over the last 2 days. That was where he erred again. He answered too sharply. That is a trade secret? The CFO slowly raised his head. A trade secret from your own legal committee? Astrid Capital was connected by video. Their representative already looked displeased before the first question. People like that do not enjoy it when someone else's panic becomes public. The chairman asked who had promised them access to the active applications. The fund representative first tried to speak in generalities, but Ryu reminded him of Kaito's personal responsibility clause. After that, the fund quickly became cautious. The representative said Kaito had assured them access would soon be expanded and called my removal a matter of hours. A matter of hours. In the room, those words sounded worse than a shout, because now it was clear. Kaito had been selling future power before the board had given it to him. Kaito looked at me with hatred he no longer hid. You created this situation yourself. You held everything in your hands for years and trusted no one. I answered calmly. I trusted you. He opened his mouth but found no phrase that could survive the simplicity of those words. Dr. Naruse tried quietly to gather his papers. Ryu stopped him with a question about the second payment for the report. Naruse froze. Yumi looked at him with unexpected anger. Ryu did not have direct bank confirmation, not yet, but he had correspondence where Kaito discussed the second part of the consultation fee after a successful vote. Naruse said he was not obligated to answer without a lawyer. Excellent. For a medical expert who had come to save the company, that sounded rather far from concern about health. The chairman announced a 10-minute break, formally for consultation with the legal committee, in reality so people could absorb it. A meeting about my weakness had turned into a meeting about crimes against me. In the hallway, Kaito caught up with Yumi. I saw it through the glass door. He grabbed her elbow, then immediately released it when he noticed the camera and the security officer. He leaned toward her and said something quietly. She turned pale, then answered sharply. I could not hear the words, but I saw his face change. She was no longer asking him for an exit. When the break ended, Kaito returned different. No care, no friendly voice. He sat, opened his laptop, and declared that he would provide the board with a full package of documents about my unstable behavior over the past year. Fragments of home video appeared on the screen. Me standing at night in the hallway. Me sitting alone in the study. Me speaking on the phone by the window. Torn pieces of life where silence looked like illness. Yumi covered her mouth with her hand. She knew those cameras. The home security system was family, not corporate. Kaito was not supposed to have access to it. Kaito said he had received the materials from someone concerned about my condition. He did not name Yumi. Clever. He left her fear and himself the chance to retreat. I looked at the screen and, for the first time, felt real cold. Not because the videos were dangerous by themselves, because Kaito had truly managed to get deeper into my house than I had thought. Ryu leaned toward me. This is not from Yumi. I nodded. She looked too frightened for it to be her planned move. Kaito continued. He showed a fragment where I spoke in an empty room at night. I will let them build the cage. Without context, it sounded strange enough that several directors tensed again. That was his best attack. Not documents, not the doctor, not the fund. He took my own words and turned them into proof of an obsession. I could explain, but explanations are always weaker than a first impression. A shadow of doubt returned to the room, and Kaito felt it. He said that all morning I had been provoked, and now I was trying to destroy the people who wanted to protect the company from my breakdown. For the first time that day, part of the room began listening to him again. Yumi stood. "Those recordings are not from me." Kaito did not even look at her. "No one said they were from you." He was using her again as a dirty wall between himself and the truth. Ryu asked the company's technical specialist to check the source of the files. Kaito objected that this would take time, and the board needed to decide today. The board chairman hesitated. "I saw it. Everyone saw it. The room was tired of blows, documents, marriage, doctors, and threats. Tired people often choose a temporary solution just to end the pain." And then the door to the room opened without a knock. Mika Hayashi, head of internal security, entered. She was not my friend. She was the person who had once blocked my access for a wrong password and never apologized. In her hands was a tablet. She bowed to the board and said the source of the home files had been identified. The recordings had been downloaded through a service account created from Kaito's device 3 months earlier. Kaito stood. "That is impossible." Mika looked at him as if she heard that phrase every day. "No. Improperly configured, careless, and very self-confident, but possible." Someone in the room exhaled sharply. Yumi sat back down as if her legs could no longer hold her. I looked at Kaito, and for the first time that day, saw not anger on his face, but real fear. Mika added that the same account had attempted to access the kitchen recordings the morning after the meeting. Apparently, someone had wanted to delete the fragment with the coffee cup, but had not managed in time. Kaito turned sharply toward me. "You set this up," I answered quietly. "I did not even know you had climbed so deeply into my house." "Thank you for showing me." The chairman announced the immediate suspension of Kaito's authority until the internal investigation was complete. Not an arrest, not a final verdict, but his temporary power ended in the very room where he had planned to take mine. Kaito turned pale. Beyond the glass wall of the hallway, I saw the 2 men who had stood by the elevators that morning. They had also heard enough. The representatives of Astrid Capital disconnected first, without goodbye. A fund does not love losing intermediaries, especially when they are exposed in front of witnesses. Naruse quickly gathered his folder and asked permission to leave the room. Ryu said the legal committee recommended preserving his documents until payments were checked. The doctor sat back down very slowly. Yumi remained in place, not moving. When the chairman asked whether she was prepared to give written testimony, she nodded and said, "Yes, without conditions." Ryu looked at me. We both knew conditions would appear later. Kaito stood by the screen, where a frozen frame still showed my nighttime silhouette. A few minutes earlier, that frame had almost saved him. Now Mika's report on illegal access hung beside it. Suddenly he laughed. Quietly, briefly, not at all cheerfully. "You think this is the end?" he asked. "You have no idea how many people have already seen the documents about Kenji's condition." I understood what he had done. If he could not win the board, he would try to drag the dirt outside, to investors, the press, creditors, anyone, as long as he drowned the company with himself. The CFO's phone vibrated first, then another, then Rias. Notifications began appearing on screens. An unknown source had sent a package about my health and the management crisis to several business publications. Kaito smiled now almost calmly. "Now let us see how the market reacts to your beautiful family performance." He had lost the vote, but pressed the fire alarm. The chairman ordered security to escort him from the building. Kaito did not resist. He walked slowly past me and stopped for a second. "You wanted proof," he said. "Now you will get an audience." Then he went out into the hallway, where the people he owed more than he could repay were already waiting. Yumi covered her face with her hands. Narusa sat motionless. The board spoke all at once. Ryu took my phone and showed me the first headlines, which were only beginning to appear. Founder of Tanaka Nexus under medical question. Board in crisis, patents at risk. Partner warned of leadership instability. I read those lines and understood that Kaito could still harm the company, even after losing temporary power. Sometimes a falling person grabs not a hand but the tablecloth with the whole table on it. Ryu asked whether I was ready to go public. I looked through the glass at the employees who were already reading the news on their phones and whispering at their desks. Before, I had wanted to strike only in a closed room, with documents, protocols, witnesses. Now Kaito had dragged us outside, and if I stayed silent, his version would become the first truth for everyone else. I stood. My head was no longer spinning. The fatigue remained, but there was no sedative haze in it anymore. Only the clarity of a man who had to speak before traitors spoke for him again. "Gather the press," I told Ryu, "and the shareholders. Today." He looked at me carefully. "This will no longer be defense. This will be public war." I nodded. He started it himself. Then I looked at Yumi. She sat without raising her face. "And you will be there too." She slowly lowered her hands. "Me?" Her voice was frightened. I answered calmly, "You signed lies with public consequences. You will also tell the truth outside a corner." Yumi did not argue. Maybe she had no strength left. Maybe she finally understood that the secret rooms were finished. By evening, we were to stand before the press, the board, and shareholders. Kaito had lost access but had managed to release the dirt outside. Yumi had agreed to speak, but her truth could destroy her too. And for the first time all this time, I no longer had to play weak. Only now, when everyone was watching, did it become clear. What made me weak was not illness or exhaustion, but trust in people who mistook it for a door without a lock. By evening, the office stopped being an office and became a place where people whispered even near the coffee machine. Headlines Kaito had sent outside faster than we had closed the boardroom flickered on employees' screens. The news said that the founder of Tanaka Nexus was under medical question, the board was arguing about temporary management, and the patent division might be at risk because of internal conflict. Not one headline called Kaito a thief. Not one wrote that Yumi had slipped me a drug, or that Dr. Naruse had issued a report without a full examination. The first blow always belongs to the person who lies faster. I stood at the office window and looked down at the journalists by the entrance. They did not know me, Yumi, Kaito, or our story. They needed a version they could give viewers before the market closed. Ryu came in without knocking and placed 3 folders on the table. Not 10, not 20, 3. He had deliberately removed everything unnecessary because the public does not listen to a court archive. The public understands only a direct blow. In the first folder was the recording of the token theft from my safe. In the second was the audio fragment where Kaito demanded second access and threatened Yumi. In the third were the documents concerning negotiations with the fund, which he had started without authority. Ryu said that if we tried to tell everything at once, people would drown in details. Coffee doctor, Sato family debts, old archive, home cameras, token, fund, board. Too much truth can also become noise. I opened the first folder and saw the frame where Yumi stood before the safe with the token in her hand. On the screen, she did not look like a villain, but a frightened woman who had already decided not to turn back. "Do we show this?" I asked. Ryu did not answer at once. "Only if she confirms it herself. Otherwise, Kaito will say you are publicly destroying your wife out of jealousy." He was right. I hated when he was right in places where I wanted a simple blow. The truth had to look not like a husband's revenge, but like a chain of actions against the company. Yumi sat in the neighboring conference room with 2 lawyers. She had been giving written testimony for 2 hours already. Not a beautiful confession, but a dry text in which every sentence could later return to accuse her. I entered without warning. She raised her eyes. Sheets with her signature lay on the table before her, and beside them a glass of water she had barely touched. Yumi looked older than she had that morning, not because of makeup, because a person who has lived for a long time inside a beautiful lie is suddenly forced to describe it in ordinary words. She said she was ready to confirm the token theft, Narusa's statement, and Kaito's calls. Then she added more quietly that she did not want her parents to end up on the street. I sat opposite her. Ryu has already prepared a restructuring. Your father must acknowledge the debts and stop playing the old family name. She nodded as if she had heard not mercy, but a sentence that was still better than the abyss. And me? She asked. The question sounded cautious. Not about marriage, not about love, about consequences. And that was the most honest thing she had said in days. I looked at her signature beneath the testimony. For you there will be the law, and a divorce, in that order. She closed her eyes, but did not cry. Apparently tears were also tired of working. Ryu called me back through the glass door. On his face was the expression that appeared when trouble was no longer coming toward us, but standing beside us and choosing a chair. Kaito had given an interview to a business channel. Not in a studio, not officially. Outside the building, beside journalists, whom he himself had warned. On the phone screen he looked composed. The split lip was almost hidden, the suit perfect, the voice quiet and confident. He said he had tried to protect the company from my unpredictable behavior. He said Yumi was under my pressure, that I was using lawyers against my own wife, and that any recordings from home could be taken out of context by a person with access to the security system. A good attack, dirty, but good. Again, he turned my proof into a sign of my obsession. If the founder records his wife and partner, perhaps he truly is sick. Ryu turned off the video. He will come to the press conference, he said. Not officially, but he will come. He needs a confrontation where you lose control in front of cameras. I looked at my reflection in the glass. Tired face, dark circles, cane beside the chair. Kaito had not completely invented my weakness. He had simply given it someone else's meaning. Then I will not lose control, I said. Ryu smirked. Excellent plan. Usually the most reliable plans begin by forbidding yourself to feel. The company press hall was opened 40 minutes later. Journalists sat in the first row, shareholders behind them, then employees who were allowed to stay if they wanted to hear everything not from the morning headlines. I asked that there be no huge company logo behind my back on the stage. Today I was not speaking as an advertising poster. Today I needed to look like a person, not a brand. Before I went out, Mika Hayashi approached me with a tablet. She confirmed the source of the leak. The package about my health had gone out from a temporary device registered to Kaito's assistant. He did not send it himself? I asked. Mika shook her head. He did, just through someone else's hand. A very human way to feel smarter than the system. This information was not yet final proof, but it closed one important question. Kaito was not simply defending himself, he had consciously carried the internal crisis outside in order to damage the company. When I stepped into the hall, the flashes struck at once. Someone shouted a question about my health. Someone asked whether it was true the board had prepared my removal. Someone said Kaito's name before I had even reached the microphone. I did not sit. I stood behind the podium, placed my palms on the wood, and waited until the noise became a little smaller. Sometimes silence works better than asking for order. I am tired, I said. That is true. I slept badly, made mistakes in people, and believed for too long that betrayal could be stopped with a personal conversation. The room grew quieter, not because the phrase was beautiful, because people had expected denial and heard an admission of something they could see with their own eyes. But fatigue does not make a person incompetent, and it does not give a partner the right to steal access to patents, a doctor the right to sell a report, or a wife the right to open a safe at night. After those words, the cameras turned toward Yumi. She sat to the side beside Ryu and did not hide her face. That mattered, not for me. For everyone already preparing a headline about family hysteria, the first question came from a Financial Channel journalist. He asked whether I was claiming that Kaito had knowingly tried to gain control over the patent division without board authority. I answered that I was not asking anyone to believe my emotions. Then Ryu put on the screen the board protocol in which Kaito presented the token, claimed he had received it from me, and admitted to preliminary negotiations with the fund. Ryu spoke instead of me, dryly, boringly, very usefully. He explained that the token had been introduced into the board's official process, which meant the origin of the key had become a corporate matter, not a family quarrel. Then the video from the study appeared on the screen. Without extra details, only the moment where Yumi opened the safe, took out the case, and left with the token, the room filled with noise. I did not look at the screen. I looked at Yumi. She rose slowly, as if every movement cost her a piece of the past. "That is me," she said into the microphone. Kenji did not give the token to Kaito. I took it from the safe at night and gave it to Kaito the next day. Questions poured in at once. She waited while Ryu asked for silence, then continued. I did not do it out of concern for the company. I did it because I was afraid of losing money, my family, and a man who was already threatening to surrender me first. It was not an excuse, and that was exactly why it worked. People do not like repentance when it is too smooth. Yumi sounded bad, broken, and very far from the former perfect wife. One journalist asked whether I had pressured her before the statement. Yumi looked at him and answered, no. He gave me the worst option of all, to tell the truth without a beautiful version for myself. I had not expected that phrase. Neither had Ryu. For several seconds, I simply stood beside the podium and understood that truth sometimes comes out rougher and more precise than any prepared speech. The doors of the hall opened at the very moment Yumi sat down. Kaito entered not alone. With him was an attorney and the very journalist to whom he had given the interview at the entrance. He did not try to burst in. He simply walked calmly to a free side microphone. A smart move. Pull the enemy out of the script and let the cameras turn toward drama by themselves. Allow me to respond, he said. His voice was even, almost sad. I did not intend to come, but now we all see how a man publicly breaks his own wife in order to regain control over the board. The noise rose again. Kaito waited for it. He had always sensed the moment well. Then he turned to Yumi and said softly, "Yumi, you are not obligated to say what he demands." She lowered her eyes. For a second, I was afraid he had hooked her again. Not with love, with the habit of fearing his next phrase. But Yumi raised her head. "You told me I would fall first." Kaito smiled. "That is your interpretation of a private conversation." Ryu played the audio, not all of it, only the fragment from the car where Kaito said, "You opened the safe yourself. You signed the medical lie yourself. If I fall, you fall first." There was no ordinary noise left in the hall. There was something else. That dense silence when people have already heard enough, but are still waiting to see how the guilty man will try to wriggle out. Kaito did not disappoint. He said the recording had been edited, that Yumi had been hysterical, that I controlled the home system, phones, lawyers, and could assemble any convenient version. His attorney added that without independent expert analysis, the audio could not be considered evidence. Formally, he was right, so Ryu did not argue about expert analysis, he simply provided the next document. The protocol from the meeting in the auxiliary office appeared on the screen. Kaito had demanded second access to active patent applications. Beside him had stood a representative of the legal committee and a security officer. Kaito did not turn very pale, only slightly, but I knew his face well enough to see it. He had forgotten about the legal committee's presence in that room. Ryu said, "This is not a home recording. This is a recording inside company premises, where Mr. Kaito demanded access beyond the scope of the board's authority." Mika rose from the first row and confirmed that the building's security system records such meetings automatically after last year's equipment theft incident. Simple, without drama, deadly to a beautiful lie. Kaito tried to go on the attack. He said it had been a test meeting to understand whether Yumi was trying to carry another fake key out of the house on my orders. "Then why did you send the board a letter about my breakdown after that meeting?" I asked. He turned toward me. "Because you came there with security." I nodded. "And why, before I arrived, did you demand second access?" He did not answer at once. This time, everyone in the hall noticed the pause. His lawyer saved him. He said the question should be moved into the legal plane, and the public discussion of internal company materials should be stopped. Too late. I was not the one who had opened the public door. A representative of Astrid Capital appeared on the screen by video link. Ryu had not warned me about this. The old fox had still left himself one surprise. The fund representative looked irritated. He said the fund was suspending negotiations because Kaito had provided incomplete information about his authority and the state of the corporate conflict. Kaito turned sharply toward the screen. "We were discussing a standard evaluation." The fund representative answered coldly, "You said the founder's removal was a matter of several hours." That phrase finished off the part of the room that still believed in the caring partner. Kaito no longer looked like a man saving the company. He looked like a man selling future power in advance. A journalist asked him about personal debts. Kaito froze. I understood that someone in the newsroom had already connected him to the morning men by the elevators or the bar in Roppongi. He answered that his personal finances had nothing to do with corporate management. On the screen behind him, Ryu showed a pledge letter where the expected advance from the fund was listed as a source for covering his private obligations. Not every detail, only the amount, date, and signature. Enough for the motive to stop being an assumption and become a line on paper. Kaito looked at Ryu as if he wanted to forget there were cameras in the room. "You bought my creditors?" he asked. Ryu calmly replied, "No, they simply dislike people who promise other people's patents instead of money." Someone in the hall laughed shortly, but the laughter died quickly. The situation was too dirty to be funny. My best friend had not simply betrayed me, he had tried to pledge the company in order to close his own hole. Kaito understood that the public version was collapsing. Then he did what people do when they lose order. He struck where it hurt most. He looked at Yumi and said, "Tell them whose idea it was with the doctor. Tell them who first said Kenji was becoming strange." Yumi turned very pale. I felt everything inside me stop again. Until that moment, she had been admitting actions that Kaito had intensified and directed. Now he was pulling her deeper. Kaito continued, "Do not stay silent. You came to me not to save the company. You said you no longer wanted to live with a man who looks at you like a piece of furniture." For a second, the hall disappeared. Only that phrase remained. Not because it justified him, because inside it there might have been a piece of truth I did not want to hear. Yumi stood. Ryu tried to stop her, but she shook her head. "Yes," she said, "I was the first to say Kenji had changed, because he had stopped seeing whether I was happy and did not ask why." Kaito smiled. He thought he had caught her. Yumi continued, "And then you took that hurt and turned it into a plan. I am guilty, but you were not saving me. You were using me. This was not an excuse and not a clean confession. It was an unpleasant human truth from which it was impossible to turn away easily." She turned toward me. "I hated that everything in my life depended on your money, and then I did the worst possible thing. I tried to steal it instead of leaving." I did not answer, not because there was nothing to say, because the hall, the cameras, and the board were not the place to bury a marriage honestly. Kaito understood that his blow had not become salvation. Then he sharply closed his lawyer's laptop and said he was leaving this illegal public execution. He took a step toward the exit, but two internal security employees were already standing by the door. Not police, not yet. Just people who were no longer obligated to let him pass as a partner. Mika rose and announced that the board had just suspended his access to the buildings, archives, and negotiation channels until the investigation was complete. Her voice was even, almost boring, the best voice for news like that. Kaito looked at me. "You think you won?" The question sounded quiet, but the microphone caught every word. I answered just as quietly, "No, I think you forced me to show people how badly I was wrong about you." He smirked, but his eyes were already darting. The phone in his hand vibrated without stopping. Creditors, fund, press, board, lawyer, all the doors he had opened with other people keys began closing at once. Ryu approached the podium and announced that in 1 hour there would be a special shareholder meeting with the legal committee present. 3 issues would be reviewed there: Kaito's authority, Narusa's report, and the damage from the press leak. This was no longer a press briefing, it was becoming an official stage where every phrase would go into the protocol, not just a headline. Kaito heard this and for the first time truly became afraid, because in front of journalists one can argue with images. In front of shareholders and lawyers one must answer with documents. His attorney quickly whispered something in his ear. Kaito nodded and suddenly became calm again. Too quickly. I already knew that kind of calm. It is how a person looks when preparing the last filthy bet. Before leaving, he stopped near the row of journalists and threw out one phrase. "At the meeting, I will show why Kenji feared an independent examination so much." The room filled with noise again. Ryu cursed quietly beside me. Yumi closed her eyes, and I understood that Kaito still had one more document, one more recording, or one more person he had been hiding until the end. Mika ordered all his channels checked, but it was too late for complete peace of mind. A person drowning in public sometimes pulls up from the bottom the thing he himself was afraid to touch. The journalists began leaving, sending their first materials to their editors. Employees now looked at me differently, but not more lightly. Truth does not restore trust in a minute. It only stops the loudest lie. Yumi remained standing by the empty chairs. I approached her, but not too close. There was enough past between us not to pretend that one public day had burned everything away. "What can he show?" I asked. She was silent for a long time. Then she said, "In the beginning, I kept a diary for the doctor, a real one, before Kaito. There are things in it that can be turned against you." I felt the exhaustion press down on my shoulders again. "Why did you not say so earlier?" Yumi looked at me without defense. "Because not all of it is a lie. That was worse than any fake video. A lie can be broken. A half-truth lasts longer, because inside it is something you are obligated to admit." Ryu approached with the folders. "Then we prepare, not justify. Separate personal pain, medical fact, and corporate crime." He said it to me but looked at Yumi. She nodded. "I will say the diary was about the marriage, not incompetence." Ryu answered, "You will, and he will show lines where you write that you are afraid of his silence." Yumi clenched her fingers. "I was afraid." I looked at her. "Of me?" She did not answer at once, then quietly said, "No, of the day you would look at me and realize how empty I am." We both fell silent. For the first time in a long while, I felt sorry for her, not as a wife and not as a traitor, but as a person who had built herself out of someone else's money, someone else's gaze, and someone else's expectations. But pity did not cancel the signatures, the coffee, and the safe. It only made the ending less pleasant. Good people love simple villains because simple villains are easier to punish without pain. 40 minutes later, the shareholder hall was ready. This time, entry was closed to random press, but official observers and the largest investors were already taking their seats. On the large screen hung the meeting agenda. My name, Kaito's name, Narusa's name, and a line about internal damage from an unauthorized leak. No beautiful words, only items behind which stood destroyed relationships. I stood behind the side door and listened to the murmur of the hall. Ryu checked the folders. Mika spoke with security. Yumi sat on a chair nearby holding a copy of her old diary. Kaito arrived 1 minute before the start. No smile, none of his old softness. In his lawyer's hands was a thin gray folder, too thin to be an archive, thin enough to be a knife. He walked past us and stopped only for a second. Last chance to cancel the performance, he said. I looked at the folder. You invited the audience yourself. Kaito leaned closer. Then do not be surprised when the audience hears more than just my dirt. He entered the hall, and the doors closed behind him. I looked at Ryu. He did not comfort me. He simply adjusted his glasses and said, "Now we say only what we can endure, even if it is truth against us." I took the cane, though I could already walk without it, not for the role of a sick man, for the memory of how easily people had mistaken weakness for permission to betray. The doors opened, the hall grew quieter. This time, I was not entering to prove that I was not broken. I was entering to show who exactly had tried to use my cracks as a key to the company. Part 9. The shareholder hall was smaller than the press hall, but the air inside felt heavier. Here people were not waiting for beautiful phrases. Here everyone looked at papers, numbers, and faces, trying to understand who exactly had brought the company to the edge. Kaito sat at a separate table beside his attorney. A thin gray folder lay before him. He did not open it immediately, but kept his palm on top, like a man who had come not to defend himself, but to cut with the final knife. Yumi sat opposite, closer to Ryu. She was no longer trying to look like the founder's expensive wife. A simple blouse, tied-back hair, and an empty place where yesterday there had still been a silver hairpin. I sat at the head of the table, not because I felt like a winner. It was simply still my place, and if I gave it up to fear now, Kaito would get the final picture he wanted. The board chairman opened the meeting briefly. He said 3 issues were under discussion: Kaito's actions, Dr. Narusa's report, and the damage from the leak to the press. Kaito asked to speak first. Ryu wanted to object, but I raised my hand slightly. If a man has a final lie, sometimes it is better to let him say it in full. Kaito rose slowly. His voice was calm, almost tired. Today, everyone has heard many accusations, but no one has asked why Kenji was so afraid of an independent evaluation of his condition. He opened the gray folder and took out several pages. I recognized Yuma's handwriting before he even named the diary. Thin lines, neat margins, dates from 6 months before all this. Kaito said that Yumi had begun writing these notes long before his involvement. There had been no threats, no tokens, no funds. There had been a wife afraid of a husband who watched her every step. The room became quiet, not because they fully believed him, because he had finally produced not a forgery, but something real. A half-truth always enters deeper than an ordinary lie. He read several lines aloud. Yumi had written that I had become cold, that I could sit silently through dinner for hours, that sometimes I looked at her as if I'd already passed sentence. I sat motionless. There was no crime in those lines, but there was pain I had refused to notice for years because the company burned louder than our home. Kaito raised his eyes. This is where it began. Not with my greed, not with a token, with a man who turned his family into another department of his corporation. Yumi turned pale. He was not defending her. He was displaying her diary as evidence against me, and at the same time as a shield for himself. He used even her pain as an asset. Ryu requested the originals for verification. Kaito's attorney answered that the documents would be provided after the meeting, but that the board was obligated to consider their contents now. I finally spoke. No, I will not argue with the diary. Several people in the room raised their eyes. Kaito had clearly expected denial, not admission. I looked at Yumi. I was a bad husband in many ways. I was silent too often. Too often I thought money solved anxiety. Too late, I noticed that the space between us was already empty. Yumi lowered her gaze. Those words did not make me feel better. They did not save the marriage or beautify me, but for the first time in this whole nightmare, I said not only the part convenient to me, then I turned to Kaito. But a bad marriage does not give you the right to steal a token from my safe, pressure Yumi, buy a doctor, and sell my patents to your creditors. Kaito smiled as if he had been waiting for exactly that, again with the loud words. I nodded, then we leave the words aside. Ryu, the documents. Ryu stood and placed 3 folders on the central table. No mountain of paper, no theater. 3 simple blocks that could be understood without a legal dictionary. The first folder contained the study recording. Yumi opens the safe, takes the token, and leaves. Beside it was her written confession, where she stated the time, place, and name of the person to whom she handed the device. The second folder contained audio and a transcript of Kaito's call. There he demanded the second access, threatened Yumi, and directly said she would fall first if he did not get the key he needed. The third folder contained the contract with Astrid Capital, Kaito's personal responsibility clause, and the letter to his creditors where the fund's advance was listed as the source for covering private debts. Ryu spoke evenly. This is not a question of whether Mr. Tanaka was an ideal husband. It is a question of whether Mr. Kaito attempted to use a family crisis for a corporate takeover. Kaito sharply answered that recordings can be taken out of context. Mika Hayashi rose from the first row and said the context had already been checked by internal security. She displayed the access diagram on the screen. The home recordings had been downloaded through a service account created from Kaito's device. The same account attempted to delete the fragment from the kitchen camera after my drugged coffee. Dr. Naruse flinched when he heard about the kitchen. Ryu noticed immediately. He turned to him and asked whether the doctor had conducted a personal examination before issuing the stronger report. Naruse replied that he had acted under conditions of an urgent corporate threat. The phrase sounded beautiful, only for the first second. Then everyone remembered that the urgency had been created by Kaito. Ryu showed an invoice for consultation support, issued to Kaito's structure the day after the first meeting. Then he showed a second letter where the additional payment depended on a successful temporary removal. Naruse asked for a lawyer. That was the most honest medical conclusion of the entire time. The board chairman ordered all his documents preserved and handed over to the external commission. Kaito still did not surrender. He said that even if there had been mistakes, I myself had allowed a management crisis, hidden problems, and used family recordings as weapons. I did not deny it. Yes, I made a mistake. I kept the company on personal trust for too long. I thought that if I built the system, the people beside me would not break it from the inside. For the first time in the meeting, the CFO looked directly at me. He too had something to remember. All those years, he had seen how the company depended not only on rules, but on my personal authority. I continued. That is why, after the review, I will transfer part of operational control to an independent committee. But that will be a board decision, not the result of theft, threats, and a fake doctor. The room changed. Not lighter, simply more honest. I had stopped defending my ego where I needed to defend the company. Kaito lost his favorite picture, the founder clinging to power at any cost. Yumi rose on her own, without prompting from Ryu. In her hands was that same diary, but complete now, not the pages Kaito had chosen. She said the diary had been about our marriage, not my incompetence. There had been fears, resentments, foolish anger, and loneliness. But there had not been a conclusion that I could not manage the company. Kaito said sharply, "You brought it to me yourself." Yumi nodded, "Yes, because I wanted you to pity me. And you chose the lines that could be used against him." She opened the last page. There was an entry made a week before the token theft. Yumi had written that Kaito increasingly spoke not about her, but about shares, access, and deadlines. Her voice trembled, but she read it to the end. I began to understand that to him, I was not a woman, but a door, and still, I did not leave. That is my fault. Kaito looked at her with such anger that even his attorney placed a hand on his shoulder. He understood that the diary had stopped being a knife pointed only at me. The board chairman asked Mika to confirm the source of the press leak. She showed the sending chain, a temporary device belonging to Kaito's assistant, a prepared package, a list of business publications, and the time of sending immediately after the failed meeting. Kaito said the assistant had acted alone. Mika played a short internal call recording. Kaito's voice said, "Send everything. Let the market learn who they are protecting." After that phrase, the hall stopped being an argument. People could still doubt the marriage, the diary, and Yumi's motives. But the damage to the company was no longer an emotion, it was an action. The CFO stood. He was pale but spoke clearly. I support the immediate removal of Kaito from all positions, blocking of access, and transfer of materials to an external investigation. One by one, the directors supported the decision. Not all of them looked at me. Some were ashamed. Some were simply calculating risks, but the vote was no longer centered on my weakness, but on his actions. Kaito listened until the count became obvious. Then he laughed quietly. You think the fund will stay without me? The deal will collapse. The shares will fall. You are destroying the company yourselves for family revenge. Ryu connected the representative of Astrid Capital by video. The man looked even colder than in the morning. He announced that the fund was prepared to continue discussions only after Kaito was removed from the process and access was fully reviewed. Kaito had not expected that. For a second, his face became empty. He had sold himself as the only bridge to the money, and the bridge had just said it preferred the road without him. The chairman read out the decision. Kaito was to be removed from his position. Access blocked. Contracts concluded during the period of temporary authority frozen pending audit. Materials transferred to law enforcement. Internal security employees approached him, not roughly, without handcuffs, just close enough to make it clear he no longer walked through this building as an owner. Kaito looked at me. You will still remain the man who recorded his wife, framed his friend, and built traps. There was no strategy left in his voice, only the resentment of a losing predator. I answered, no, I will remain the man who realized too late whom he had let near the safe. I will have to live with that. You will have to live with what you did after it. He wanted to say something else, but the hall door opened. Two economic crime investigators entered, along with a representative of the prosecutor's office. Ryu had filed the complaint before the meeting even began. Kaito sharply turned to his attorney. The attorney already understood that the dispute was moving into another room, where microphones would no longer help. The investigator asked Kaito to come give explanations regarding pressure, illegal access, and attempted diversion of corporate assets. Kaito did not resist. He adjusted his jacket as if that could restore his old appearance. On his way out, he paused beside Yumi. You think he will forgive you? He asked. Yumi looked at him calmly. No, but I no longer live to be chosen by the worst man in the room. He left. Without a loud arrest, without a beautiful scream, he simply disappeared behind the door with people to whom he could no longer sell someone else's future. Dr. Naru.
This is not a finale where the hero simply destroys his enemies and smiles into the camera. Kenji won, but he lost his marriage, his trust, and the illusion that personal loyalty can replace rules. His true victory is not revenge. It is that now no single person will ever hold the entire company on blind trust again.
Dr. Naruz was escorted out separately for questioning. He was still trying to speak about professional ethics, but no one in the room saw him as a doctor anymore. Only as a man who had placed a stamp beside money. When the door closed, the room did not explode with relief. There was too much filth to celebrate. The board sat silently, as if only now understanding how close the company had come to losing control. The chairman turned to me. Kenji, the board accepts your proposal for an independent committee. Until the audit is complete, key patent decisions will require 3 signatures. Once, such a phrase would have struck my pride. Today it sounded right. I nodded, agreed, and began with a review of my own decisions over the last year. Ryu looked at me in surprise, then slowly nodded. He understood I was not making a pretty gesture for the room. I truly no longer wanted to build the company on one person, even if that person was me. After the meeting, the journalists were given a short statement. No intimate details from the diary, no scene, only facts. Kaito removed, documents transferred to investigators, deals frozen, company conducting an independent audit. Yumi stood to the side. No one mistook her for the perfect wife anymore, but she did not try to be one. When employees approached me, she did not intervene, did not cry, did not ask to speak in private. Later, in the empty hallway, she took the antique hairpin from her bag. The same one I had given her on the night I heard the conspiracy. She held it out to me. I cannot keep this. I looked at the silver in her palm. Once, the object had been a gift, then a mask, then almost evidence. I did not take the hairpin at once. Leave it with Ryu until the case is over. Yumi nodded. It hurt her, but she did not argue. Sometimes the right distance begins with the simple transfer of an object through a third person. She said, I am not asking you to forgive me. I answered, good. With that, the most honest conversation of our entire marriage was almost over. Then I did add, give testimony without trying to look better. That is the only thing that matters now. Yumi nodded, this time without tears. A week later, the board officially approved the independent committee. I remained founder and chief strategy engineer, but I could no longer single-handedly open patent decisions, major deals, or emergency accesses. The market hit the shares at first, then it stabilized when the audit confirmed that the active patents had not been transferred to the fund, and the data leak had been stopped before real damage. Kaito tried to defend himself through the press for another month. He called everything personal revenge, a corporate coup, and board panic. Then his own creditors began giving testimony. It turned out he had promised them the advance from the deal before he received temporary authority. He had promised other people's patents, other people's decisions, and someone else's company in order to close his own pit. Dr. Naruse lost the right to work with corporate reports until the investigation was complete. His attorney called it a misunderstanding. Ryu called it the gentlest word of the year. The Sato family sold the country house and part of their assets to begin debt restructuring. Yuma's father sent me a letter without gratitude, but with a signature under the acknowledgement of obligations. For him, that was almost repentance. The divorce passed quietly. Yumi gave testimony, admitted her involvement in the token theft, the medical statement, and the transfer of documents to Kaito. Her lawyer tried to soften the wording, but for the first time, she did not hide behind someone else's words. I received no joy from it. People often think revenge ends in lightness. In reality, after it remains an empty room where you finally hear everything that anger used to drown out. 3 months later, the internal audit was completed. The company survived. The patents remained inside. The board changed. The CFO, who had once been afraid to argue with Kaito, himself proposed new crisis access rules. Mika Hayashi was promoted and dryly said that now even my personal password would be blocked after 3 errors. I said she sounded too pleased. She replied that security rarely mourns someone else's convenience. Ryu came to my office with the final folder on the case. Inside was a copy of Kaito's indictment and a separate envelope with the silver hairpin Yumi had handed over through him. I opened the envelope, looked at the object, and closed it again. Not in the safe. Not in the gift drawer. I simply placed it on a shelf beside the folders where I kept decisions I no longer wanted to forget. Ryu asked what I would do now. I looked through the glass wall at the boardroom. People were sitting there, arguing without fear, because now argument was part of the system, not a threat to my name. Work, I said, but no longer as if trust replaces rules. Ryu smirked. Finally, an adult thought from a man who built a company worth billions. I stayed alone in the office closer to night. The city beyond the window glowed cold and calm. In that light, there was neither victory nor defeat. Only the next day. I played the old hallway recording, the very first one, where Yumi asked about the doctor and Kaito promised to freeze my vote. I listened for 10 seconds and deleted the copy from my work phone. Not because I had forgotten. The originals were with Ryu and the investigators. I simply no longer needed to carry their voices in my pocket in order to remember what they had taught me. The next day, I entered the boardroom without a cane. People raised their heads, but no one fell fearfully silent as before. The discussion continued, and that was better than any bow. I sat not at the head of the table, but to the side, beside the technical team. The new chairman was surprised, but said nothing. Sometimes power returns not to where you sit, but to the place where people stop being afraid to speak the truth. The first issue was the patents Kaito had tried to use as collateral for his life. Now they were discussed by engineers, lawyers, and auditors together, slowly, boringly, correctly. I listened to them and, for the first time in a long while, did not feel the need to hold everything alone. It turned out a company does not become weaker when it stops depending on one person. It simply becomes more mature. After the meeting, I received a short message from Yumi. She wrote that she was leaving Tokyo for the duration of the investigation and would give all the testimony she had promised. At the end was one sentence, "I did not know who I was without your money and chose the dirtiest way to find out." I read the message once and did not reply. No reply was needed. Some people leave not so that they can be brought back, but so they can finally stop being part of your destruction. Kaito later tried to make a deal with investigators. His lawyers spoke of debt pressure, panic, and my excessive control. All of it could explain his fear. None of it canceled his choice. When I was called to give official testimony, the investigator asked when I understood that Kaito had not simply made a mistake but betrayed me. I thought about the hallway, the safe, the board, and the gray folder. Then I answered honestly, not when he stole access, when he began calling it care. The investigator wrote the phrase down without emotion. For some reason, I remembered the sound of his pen. That evening, I again walked past the Ginza boutique where Yumi's card had once been declined. Inside, a woman laughed with her friends while the cashier wrapped a dress in white paper. I stopped for a second and walked on. Back then, I had thought the first card decline would be a sweet blow. Now it was simply the beginning of a very long road through filth. Revenge did not return my marriage to me. It did not make Kaito a stranger retroactively. It did not turn pain into a clean victory. It only pulled the beautiful fabric off what had already been rotting beneath it. But the company survived. My name remained mine. The patents did not become collateral for someone else's debts, and the people who called my fatigue a doorway for theft finally met a door that closed in front of them. In the office, I opened a new document and wrote the first rule for the internal code. No crisis of trust is resolved by transferring power without verifying facts. The phrase was dry, almost boring. Ryu would have approved, and I liked it for exactly that reason. After betrayal, you want loud words, but the future holds better on boring rules. I turned off the light and left the office. For a second, my face was reflected in the glass of the door. Tired, older, but no longer the face of a man playing weak in order to survive. I was no longer the husband who had stood in the hallway with a gift in his hand and listened as his life was sold behind a door, and no longer the founder who thought personal loyalty could replace a system. I left the building alone, without cameras or press statements. Night Tokyo roared around me as if nothing special had happened. For the city, perhaps that was true. But for me, it all ended not at the moment Kaito was led away, and not on the day Yumi signed the divorce. It ended when I finally understood. Trust does not have to be blind to be real.